In this video, we're going to be breaking down Time's Family Guy Was Gay 2-hour compilation. Stewie casually admits he's probably queer after gushing about Captain Picard cradling him in his arms at a Star Trek convention. Peter gets injected with a gay gene and leaves Lois for his boyfriend Scott before the gene wears off mid-orgy. Stewie whispers, "I love you," to Brian while ballroom dancing, then desperately backtracks by claiming he said, "olive juice." And those are just 3 of the LGBTQ moments we're covering in this video. Can you imagine all the wild situations when we dive deep into Time's Family Guy Was Gay over the next 2 hours? I was certainly surprised by some of the stuff I found when researching this compilation, so if you're ready to explore everything from drag personas to conversion therapy camps to trans storylines, sit back, relax, maybe grab some pumptinis because Peter drinks those when he's fabulous. And let's begin. Family Gay. Peter Griffin gets temporarily turned gay through a medical experiment in one of Family Guy's most controversial episodes, creating chaos that involves muffin baking, an 11-way encounter, and a conversion therapy camp kidnapping. In Family Guy's 7th season, Family Gay kicks off with Lois handing Peter money for groceries with one instruction: buy beans. But Peter somehow ends up at a horse auction in Louisville because apparently he just wanders into random states like a GPS, having an existential crisis, and buys a mentally challenged horse. The show literally uses the R word because this aired in 2009 when Family Guy was in its "we can say whatever we want" era. The horse immediately pees itself, headbutts walls, and stares at everyone like it's auditioning for the Ring remake. Peter's solution? Makes the entire family urinate on command so the horse doesn't feel bad. Stewie's response that they're an unusual family might be the understatement of the decade. Peter enters this disaster animal into a professional horse race named Till Death after a canceled Fox show. The race goes exactly as expected when you enter your unqualified pet in a sporting event. The horse runs into the stands, causing $100,000 in damage, supposedly tramples deaf second graders, then dies from a heart attack. Peter disposes of the body by yeeting it into Mort Goldman's pharmacy. Now, the Griffins owe massive debt, and Peter needs cash yesterday. Enter the medical experiments. Peter volunteers as a human guinea pig, getting injected with various genes. First, the squirrel gene. Peter gets twitchy, like he's had 17 espressos. Then the Seth Rogen gene, which makes you appear funny without actually being funny, with Rogen voicing this ultimate self-roast. Then comes the gay gene. Scientists want to prove homosexuality is genetic, not a choice. Peter's hesitant until they offer $125, at which point his morals evaporate. Peter's sexual orientation apparently costs the same as a decent Olive Garden dinner. The transformation is instant and stereotypical. Peter wears different fabulous outfits in every scene, bakes muffins, drinks pumptinis, reads InStyle magazine, and wishes he was Beyoncé. Lois enjoys this phase because Peter's suddenly doing housework without being asked, but reality crashes when Lois tries initiating bedroom activities. Peter drops the bomb. He's gay, which means their physical relationship is over. Lois genuinely didn't connect those dots. Peter introduces his boyfriend Scott and announces he's leaving with maximum drama. He moves in with Scott, they watch Lifetime movies, and back home, Lois is heartbroken while Chris tries being the man of the house with all the confidence of someone who's never paid a bill. Brian and Stewie decide kidnapping is the solution. They drag Peter to conversion therapy camp, which the show portrays exactly as horribly as expected. The counselor explains Jesus hates homosexuals, then instructs participants to beat up a gay dummy with baseball bats. Except everyone keeps using the bats in unintended ways. When the camp tries teaching Peter to talk like a straight man, he keeps translating everything wrong. Drinking beer becomes worrying about empty calories. Playing football transforms into bad movie night at Alan and Omar's. Peter speedruns, failing at straightness. Lois shows up to rescue Peter, telling him his sexual identity isn't a choice and he should go back to Scott. For a show that spent 20 minutes deploying stereotypes, this moment lands with unexpected sincerity. Peter returns to Scott, who reveals his welcome home surprise, an 11-way with 10 other guys. Then the gene wears off, mid-orgy. Peter suddenly snaps back to his straight self, looks around, and screams while running out naked, but stops to grab balloons first, because priority. The doctor casually finds notes saying the gene only lasts 2.5 weeks. Peter returns home, and the family agrees to never discuss this again. Just when normalcy seems restored, Mort throws the dead horse's corpse through their living room window as revenge. This episode sparked debates still happening today about whether Family Guy was satirizing homophobia or being lazy with stereotypes. The Parents Television Council called it their worst show of the week. Glad wasn't thrilled. MacFarlane later claimed surprise at negative reactions, which is like being shocked that people have opinions about an episode where sexuality is treated like temporary flu. The show got Emmy-nominated anyway. Looking back, it's a perfect time capsule of late 2000s network TV, when you could air stuff that would get you canceled today while trying to make progressive points about genetics and identity. And just when you think Family Guy couldn't get more reckless with identity and shock humor, the next episode goes even further and blows up an even bigger cultural landmine: Quagmire's dad. Quagmire's war hero father comes out as transgender and gets immediate surgery to become Ida. Then Brian unknowingly sleeps with her and vomits for 30 seconds straight when he finds out, creating what might be Family Guy's most controversial episode about trans identity. Quagmire's dad opens with Quagmire announcing his father's visiting Quahog. Lieutenant Commander Dan Quagmire is a decorated Vietnam veteran getting honored at the naval ball, and Quagmire can't stop bragging about what a ladies' man his dad is. When Dan arrives, he does a full dance routine to "These Boots Are Made for Walking" that immediately makes Peter suspicious, because apparently dancing equals gay in Peter's brain, which tracks for his detective skills. Dan orders a Cosmopolitan, complains about perspiring, and checks his phone during war stories. Peter decides this man is definitely gay, citing evidence that includes owning the Sex and the City DVD box set. Quagmire's in complete denial mode, accusing Peter of jealousy because Peter's dad is a drunk and his is a war hero. At the naval ball, things get aggressively homoerotic, with every military guy making unintentional double entendres. They talk about Dan taking loads, stroking privates, being the best man to have in your hole, and having the best penis in the military. Apparently they rated them, which is either impressive record-keeping or deeply concerning. The jokes pile up like a game of innuendo Jenga until even Quagmire gets uncomfortable. Finally, Quagmire confronts his dad and asks if he's gay. Dan says no, then drops the actual bomb. He's a woman trapped in a man's body and plans to have gender reassignment surgery while visiting Quahog. Quagmire responds with, "Just be gay," which is honestly the funniest acceptance speech ever. Quagmire tries processing this with Peter and Joe, but they keep calling it gay, no matter how many times he explains the difference. Peter's understanding of gender identity has all the nuance of a sledgehammer to a piñata. Dan goes to Dr. Hartman for the procedure, and the surgery happens instantly. No hormones, no recovery period, no gradual transition, just instant woman, like a really disturbing Pokemon evolution. Dr. Hartman emerges, covered in blood, with Dan now fully transformed into Ida, complete with long blonde hair and feminine features. Peter immediately starts singing "Walking on Sunshine" because apparently major life transitions need a soundtrack. The whole thing treats gender reassignment surgery like a makeover montage from a teen movie, except way more problematic. At dinner with the Griffins, Ida discusses the surgery in graphic detail, explaining they inverted the penis to simulate a vagina, because nothing says appropriate dinner conversation like surgical procedures. Lois throws away Ida's crumble in the outside garbage without explanation, which is both rude and weirdly specific. Peter asks if Ida misses her penis with all the tact of someone who's never heard of boundaries. Meg gets compared to needing surgery for her looks, brutal even by Griffin family standards. Meanwhile, Brian's been away at a seminar learning about web-based internet series and returns to Quahog for a drink at the Marriott. He meets Ida, they hit it off, discussing writing and philosophy, and Brian thinks he's found his soulmate. They go back to her hotel room and hook up. The next morning, Brian comes home glowing and shows everyone a photo of his new woman. Peter and Lois immediately recognize Ida and laugh uncontrollably. Later, Stewie mentions Quagmire's dad had a sex change. Brian connects the dots and begins vomiting. For 30 seconds. The show dedicates serious screen time to Brian retching and screaming, creating a massive puddle like he's auditioning for the Exorcist reboot. This extended disgust scene became one of the episode's most criticized moments, framing trans women as something revolting rather than focusing on the actually relevant issue. Brian slept with his friend's parent, friend code violation number 1, regardless of gender. Quagmire finds out when Ida mentions her new boyfriend. He storms to the Griffin house and brutally beats Brian unconscious, which, honestly, fair response to finding out your friend slept with your dad. As Quagmire leaves, a bloodied Brian delivers his final line about having relations with Quagmire's father, getting the last word even while beaten senseless, because Brian always needs the last word. It's basically his signature move. The episode exploded into controversy immediately. GLAAD criticized everything from the instant surgery to Brian's vomiting to treating Ida as a punchline. The Parents Television Council called it their worst show of the week. McFarlane later claimed surprise at the backlash, arguing Ida was sympathetic because she got to explain her feelings. This defense ignores that every other character treats her transition as either a joke or something disgusting. The episode tried having empathetic moments while simultaneously making trans identity the butt of every joke, which is like trying to be supportive while actively throwing tomatoes. Years later, it remains a masterclass in how not to handle transgender characters on television, even when you claim progressive intentions. Just when the episode already feels like it's playing with fire, the storyline zooms in on the moment that pushed it from problematic to flat-out infamous. Brian sleeps with Ida. Brian Griffin hooks up with what he thinks is his soulmate at a hotel bar, only to discover the next day that he had sex with Quagmire's recently transitioned father, leading to 30 seconds of continuous vomiting that became one of Family Guy's most controversial scenes. Quagmire's dad features this storyline as Brian returns from a web-based internet seminar. Remember when that was a new concept? Feeling ignored by his family. Nobody cares about his educational experience because the Griffins have the emotional investment capacity of goldfish with amnesia. Brian heads to the Marriott for a drink, where he meets Ida, who's staying there after a fight with Quagmire about her transition. They bond over drinks, discussing writing and life philosophy. Brian delivers his pretentious artist speech about watching the world like a camera capturing scenes, which somehow works as a pickup line. The bar for seduction in Quahog is apparently underground. They hit it off, exchange names, order more drinks, and Ida suggests they continue the conversation in her hotel room. Brian settles the tab, puts it on her room, and heads upstairs. They spend the night together. The next morning, Brian comes home absolutely glowing like someone who just won the lottery while everyone else is stuck doing taxes. He announces he met an amazing woman and finally understands what soulmate means after years of hearing the phrase. He's convinced he's found the whole package: classy, smart, beautiful. Peter asks if he met her at the seminar, but Brian explains it happened right here in town the previous night. He shows everyone a photo on his phone. Peter and Lois immediately recognize Ida and start laughing uncontrollably. We're talking bent over, can't breathe, tears streaming down their faces laughing. Brian misinterprets this as jealousy, insisting he's found a real woman, which only makes them laugh harder because Brian's ego is so massive it has its own gravitational field. Later, Brian's complaining to Stewie about how nobody in the house cares about anyone but themselves, which is rich coming from Brian. Let me tell you about my novel, Griffin. Stewie actually listens and asks about the seminar and the woman. Brian describes his amazing few days. Then Stewie casually drops the bomb. Quagmire's father, decorated war hero Lieutenant Commander Dan Quagmire, is now a woman. Total sex change. Brian laughs, thinking it's hilarious gossip. They discuss what Ida looks like. Stay says, Not half bad, nothing you'd look twice at, what trans people do regarding relationships, and making tasteless jokes about it being a train wreck down there and an absolute casserole of nonsense. Stewie mentions Ida's staying at the Marriott after fighting with Quagmire. Brian realizes he was just at the Marriott. They discuss what to call her now, and when Stewie reveals her name is Ida, Brian connects the dots. The vomiting begins. Brian retches violently, continuously, for 30 solid seconds of screen time. The show commits to this bit like it's an Olympic sport. He's gasping, screaming, retching again, creating what Stewie describes as a massive puddle. The extended sequence became one of the episode's most criticized elements because it frames sleeping with a trans woman as something so disgusting it requires half a minute of violent physical revulsion, longer than most cutaway. Gags. Stewie stands there confused, asking what's wrong. Brian finally screams that he had sex with her at the Marriott. Both of them start screaming together in horror. Brian yells about how trans people should notify the neighborhood when they move somewhere new, like they're registered on some list. Stewie points out Ida's just visiting, not moving, which somehow makes it worse in their panic logic. The immediate fallout involves Brian trying to process what happened while the episode treats his disgust as justified. Quagmire eventually finds out when Ida mentions her new boyfriend. He storms to the Griffin house, drags Brian out from under Peter and Lois's bed, where he's hiding like he owes money to the mob, and beats him unconscious. The beating is brutal and prolonged, with Quagmire yelling about staying away from his family. As Quagmire leaves, Brian delivers his final line. He had intercourse with Quagmire's father, getting the last word even while bloodied and beaten because Brian always needs the last word, even when he's absolutely in the wrong. The scene sparked massive controversy for portraying trans identity as something revolting rather than focusing on the actual issue. Brian slept with his friend's parent without knowing. The 30-second vomiting sequence suggested trans women are inherently deceptive or disgusting, contributing to harmful stereotypes. MacFarlane defended it by saying Brian's heterosexual and would react the same way a gay man would to discovering he'd slept with a woman. But this comparison ignores how the scene was framed and executed. The episode remains a case study in how shock value comedy can cross from edgy into genuinely harmful territory. And then there's an older moment from the show that kind of sits on the opposite end of the spectrum, still full of stereotypes, but weirdly trying to be supportive in its own chaotic Family Guy way. If you're enjoying the video so far, subscribe to the channel. Jasper's wedding and Mayor West's gay marriage ban. Brian's flamboyantly gay cousin Jasper visits Quahog to announce his engagement to Ricardo, a Filipino man he met on his kitchen floor, only for Mayor Adam West to ban gay marriage as a distraction from wasting taxpayer money on a solid gold frog statue, leading Brian to take the mayor hostage. You may now kiss the, guy who receives. From season 4 opens with Brian's cousin Jasper arriving at the Griffin house with his boyfriend Ricardo. Jasper is every gay stereotype rolled into one person, complete with dramatic mannerisms and lines about being tortured, sitting across from sailors on his flight, because apparently he can't control himself around men in uniform. He announces over dinner that he and Ricardo are getting married, which Peter immediately uses to insult Meg by pointing out that if gay men can marry each other, she's officially out of options. Meanwhile, Mayor Adam West unveils a solid gold statue of Dig M, the Sugar Smacks frog, in what might be the most pointless use of municipal funds since someone decided to build a bridge to nowhere. The statue costs so much that West has to announce extreme budget cutbacks, which the citizens of Quahog are not thrilled about. West needs a distraction from this scandal, and fast. The political situation escalates when Mayor West announces a citywide ban on gay marriages, effectively making everyone forget about the expensive frog statue because apparently Quahog residents have the attention span of goldfish watching reality TV. The announcement comes right as Jasper and Ricardo are planning their wedding at the Griffin house. Jasper is devastated, lamenting that all he wanted was to marry a skinny, hairless Filipino boy, which he considers the American dream. Brian decides he's going to fight this ban because Jasper's always been there for him when needed. He starts a petition to overturn the decision, going door to door, collecting signatures in Quahog. This is where things get complicated, because Lois reveals she doesn't support gay marriage, despite being generally open-minded about gay people existing. Classic love the sinner, hate the sin logic that makes zero sense. Lois's position creates family tension that would rival a Thanksgiving dinner where someone brings up politics. She refuses to sign Brian's petition and eventually moves to her parents' house with Stewie until the whole thing blows over, which is basically the adult equivalent of taking your ball and going home. Meanwhile, Chris gets recruited by the Young Republicans through a girl named Alyssa, and they convince him to destroy Brian's petition in exchange for getting to touch boobs, proving that teenage boys will literally do anything for physical contact. Chris burns the petition after Brian worked 24 hours straight to get 10,000 signatures, forcing Brian to start over from scratch. This is friendship betrayal at a level that makes Brutus stabbing Caesar look like a minor disagreement. Brian goes back out and somehow manages to collect another 10,000 signatures overnight, which requires paying off people and doing unspecified things in West Quahog. He's not proud of the show. Heavily implies these things involve his mouth and other men's anatomy, because subtlety isn't Family Guy's strong suit. He bursts into Mayor West's office just as West is about to sign the gay marriage ban with all capital letters, because apparently that makes it more official. When West refuses to tear up the ban, Brian snaps and takes him hostage at gunpoint. Yes, Brian Griffin commits a felony because his cousin can't get married, which is either deeply touching or completely insane, depending on your perspective. The hostage situation plays out like a bad action movie, where the villain keeps doing magic tricks, with Mayor West claiming he has a tiny bulletproof shield somewhere on his body and swallowing a wall to escape. Don't ask how that works. It's Family Guy. The standoff continues until Lois has her change of heart moment at her parents' house. She realizes that two straight people who hate each other shouldn't have more right to be together than two gay people who love each other, which is actually a pretty solid point wrapped in the chaos of this episode. She goes to City Hall and convinces Brian to surrender, arguing that dragging this out only hurts his cause. Mayor West agrees to drop the ban since the hostage situation successfully distracted everyone from the Dig M scandal anyway, which was his goal all along. The circular logic is almost beautiful in its stupidity. He also drops the kidnapping charges against Brian in exchange for a key to a Volkswagen Scirocco that Peter's dad apparently had in his candy jar, because sure, why not? The episode concludes with Jasper and Ricardo finally getting married in the Griffin backyard, with Lois fully supportive after her complete 180 on gay marriage. The wedding happens peacefully, and everyone celebrates love winning or whatever, though the episode never addresses that Brian literally committed armed kidnapping and faced zero real consequences. Mayor West officiates the ceremony. Peter makes inappropriate jokes, and Stewie laments missing what he describes as a topless cheerleader parade with a 100-foot chocolate teddy bear and F-16s doing aerial acrobatics to Queen music, which honestly sounds more entertaining than most actual parades. The episode sparked discussions about gay marriage during a time when it was still illegal in most states. It aired in 2006, well before the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage nationwide in 2015. Family Guy, taking a pro-gay marriage stance, was considered relatively progressive for network television at the time, even if the execution involved every stereotype imaginable and a literal hostage situation. The show used comedy to make political commentary, though whether it helped or hurt the cause depends on who you ask. Looking back, it's a time capsule of mid-2000s attitudes about LGBTQ rights, complete with offensive jokes and surprisingly earnest moments about love and acceptance. Family Guy once turned gay marriage into chaos and comedy, and next it digs into Stewie's psyche with a brutally honest therapy episode that's way darker than anyone expected. Stewie's therapy session. Stewie Griffin spends an entire episode in therapy with Dr. Cecil Pritchfield, voiced by Ian McKellen, after pushing a classmate down the stairs, leading to revelations about his sexuality, his fake British accent, and his crippling loneliness. before ultimately letting the therapist die to protect his secrets. Send In Stewie Please from Season 16 dedicates its runtime to a two-character therapy session that's basically Stewie talking to an older, gay British therapist for 20 minutes. The episode opens with Stewie entering Dr. Pritchfield's office with maximum attitude, immediately critiquing everything from the empty tissue box to the Dunkin' Donuts coffee cup, which he claims is basically tattooing "Can't afford Starbucks" on your forehead. He name-drops Bethany Frankel from Real Housewives, demonstrates encyclopedic knowledge of Bravo programming, and mentions knowing Andy Cohen because apparently he's his type, humble brag, much. The whole opening establishes that Stewie is deflecting hard, using pop culture references and snobbery as armor against actually addressing why he's there. Dr. Pritchfield immediately notices something Stewie considers fundamental to his identity. He can't hear Stewie's British accent. This sends Stewie into a spiral because the accent is supposedly his most recognizable trait, the thing everyone comments on. When the doctor insists he doesn't hear anything British about Stewie's speech, it becomes this whole meta-commentary about whether the accent is real or performed. Stewie gets increasingly agitated trying to prove he sounds British, while Pritchfield calmly maintains he hears nothing unusual. This sets up the episode's central tension about authenticity versus performance, wrapped in what should be a simple question about why Stewie pushed Tyler down the stairs. The conversation shifts when Stewie turns the tables and analyzes Pritchfield using only a vacation photo on the desk. He deduces everything about the therapist's relationship with his younger partner Michael, including the 26-year age gap, the financial struggles of affording nice vacations on a preschool psychologist's salary, the insecurity about aging and mortality, and the fear that Michael will eventually leave him for someone younger and wealthier. The analysis is brutal and precise, breaking down their trip to Rio, where they stayed at a cheaper hotel but visited the expensive Fasano Hotel for drinks to take an Instagram photo that makes them look more successful than they are. Stewie basically psychologically destroys this man, using one photograph, proving he's just as perceptive as any trained therapist. It's Sherlock Holmes meets really mean gossip, and it absolutely wrecks Pritchfield emotionally. After this power play, Stewie finally breaks down and admits the truth. He's incredibly lonely. He has no friends at school, nobody to eat lunch with, and the other kids think he's weird. This vulnerability leads to discussing why he pushed Tyler down the stairs in the first place. Stewie admits he only did it because he likes Tyler and was afraid Tyler wouldn't like him back. Then comes the sexuality discussion that the episode was marketed around. Stewie immediately clarifies he's not gay, preemptively telling Pritchfield to calm down because he can see him getting excited about a potential coming out session. He says, if anything, he's less gay than he used to be. Meta commentary on the show, toning down those jokes. But then he admits that he thinks Grant Gustin from The Flash and he would make an adorable Instagram couple, which is basically admitting attraction while denying it in the same breath. He mentions hearing the word fluid being tossed around a lot, then says he's confident in his heterosexuality, pausing to confirm that's even a real word. The episode takes a turn when Stewie performs Hamilton, specifically the opening number, complete with hiccups throughout because he's so emotional. He's memorized the entire thing but has nobody to perform it for, which perfectly encapsulates his isolation. After this breakthrough moment, Pritchfield helps Stewie realize his British accent is actually fake, an affectation he created as armor. Stewie drops the accent and speaks in his real American voice, sounding completely different. He admits his entire persona is carefully constructed to keep people at arm's length and make him feel special. For a brief moment, Stewie embraces being vulnerable and authentic, planning to talk to Tyler and make real friends as his real self. But then Pritchfield says the worst possible thing. Stewie's finally going to be just like everybody else. This triggers Stewie's superiority complex. He refuses to be normal, to be like the zeros in his miserable town or his family. He immediately reverts to his British accent and declares he'll never lift the veil. Nobody will ever know the real him. Except Pritchfield now knows, which creates a problem. When Pritchfield needs his heart medication, Stewie refuses to get it, essentially letting him die because he can't have anyone know his true identity. The therapist begs for help while Stewie casually watches him die, even making jokes about how chatty he's being for someone having a heart attack. Pritchfield's boyfriend Michael calls to ask for a divorce just before he dies, adding insult to fatal injury. The episode ends with Stewie asking Brian to sleep with him, admitting he did something awful but refusing to elaborate. The entire therapy session revealed Stewie's deepest insecurities about his sexuality, identity, and loneliness, only for him to murder the one person who saw his authentic self. It's Family Guy attempting a serious character study while still being Family Guy, complete with a death played for dark comedy. The episode sparked discussions about Stewie's sexuality that continue today, with the writers intentionally leaving it ambiguous while acknowledging he's somewhere on the spectrum between straight and gay, using the word fluid as their catch-all answer. Family Guy peeled back Stewie's entire identity in a therapy episode that turned dark fast, and next the show flips to Bruce finally coming out in a storyline that's messy, loud, and surprisingly sincere. Bruce comes out and marries Jeffrey. Bruce, Quahog's perpetually cheerful gay man known for his "oh no" catchphrase, gets pressured by his homophobic parents into proposing to Meg Griffin, leading to a wedding ceremony where Meg calls it off herself after realizing Bruce is only doing this to please his family, allowing Bruce to finally come out and marry his longtime boyfriend Jeffrey in a Walgreens parking lot. Meg's wedding from season 19 opens with Meg helping decorate for a school dance with a climate change theme that involves pumping heat up and filling the gym with 6 inches of water, because nothing says teen romance like simulating environmental catastrophe. When Meg mentions nobody asked her to the dance, Bruce invites her to hang out, and they bond over being outcasts. Bruce lives on their street in what Brian describes as the incongruous purple one with all the desert plants, and apparently nobody in the Griffin family noticed their neighbor was extremely gay despite him working at Lush, and saying "oh no" in the most theatrical voice imaginable. They start dating, which confuses everyone because Bruce has been coded as gay since his first appearance, but Meg remains completely oblivious. The relationship escalates quickly, with Bruce taking Meg bowling and generally being a supportive presence in her life. Lois immediately clocks that Bruce is gay and tries warning Meg, even showing her an old educational film about homosexuality that treats it like smallpox, because nothing says productive conversation like vintage propaganda. Meg refuses to believe it, accusing Lois of being jealous because Meg's finally happy and Lois is stuck in a miserable marriage. Peter actually defends the relationship, arguing that the best case scenario for someone like Meg is dying alone in a lighthouse, so dating a gay man is still an upgrade. This is simultaneously the meanest and most pragmatic parenting Peter has ever done, which tracks for a character who regularly forgets his children's names. Things spiral when Bruce's parents, Phil and Candy, straight, yes, that's actually their last name because Subtlety died in a fire, come to town. Bruce proposes to Meg at a bowling alley, though the proposal gets interrupted by a chaotic scene with kids and fruit punch that has nothing to do with anything. Meg accepts, thrilled to finally be getting married despite being 18 years old and having known Bruce for approximately 3 days. The Griffins meet Bruce's parents at dinner, and it becomes immediately clear they're extremely conservative and pushing Bruce toward heterosexual marriage. Phil and Candy make pointed comments about wanting a heterosexual marriage just like you always wanted, while Bruce nervously agrees, and everyone except Peter picks up on the subtext. Peter's too busy demanding the longest fork and knife from the waiter because his arms were torn off at a Cherry Poppin' Daddies concert earlier in the episode, which is a whole separate subplot that's exactly as weird as it sounds. The wedding day arrives with all the traditional ceremony elements, except the priest is actually Jeffrey, Bruce's longtime boyfriend who's been relegated to officiating his partner's sham marriage, which is either peak gay tragedy or peak Family Guy absurdism, depending on your perspective. When the priest asks if anyone objects, Meg stands up and objects to her own wedding. She admits she knows Bruce doesn't really want to marry her and is only doing this for his parents. Bruce breaks down and comes out to his parents. declaring he likes men and making a joke about how all gay men made that choice when they couldn't find a table in the high school cafeteria, which is actually pretty solid commentary about social outcasts wrapped in offensive packaging. Phil and Candy react exactly as terribly as expected, preparing to leave immediately. But Bruce stops the ceremony to propose to Jeffrey right there at the altar, asking him to marry him in front of everyone. Jeffrey, who's been standing there in priest robes watching his boyfriend almost marry a teenage girl, says yes. The church refuses to marry them because they don't recognize gay people as people, the show going for the jugular on religious hypocrisy, so everyone relocates to the Walgreens parking lot down the street. Peter officiates the ceremony using his vest-given powers, again, separate subplot, pronouncing them husband and husband, with the caveat that they should kiss when they get home rather than in public. The episode represents a significant moment for Bruce's character after appearing in Family Guy for nearly 20 years. He'd been openly gay-coded since his first appearance, but never officially acknowledged it until this episode. The show aired in November 2020, during a period when Family Guy was actively trying to phase out gay jokes and portray LGBTQ+ characters more respectfully. Having Bruce come out, stand up to his homophobic parents, and marry his boyfriend was the show's attempt at redemption after decades of using gay people as punchlines. Whether it succeeded is debatable, considering the episode still featured plenty of stereotypes, and the wedding happened in a Walgreens parking lot, though that's honestly more dignified than some Las Vegas chapels. Meg ending up as a plot device for someone else's coming out story also tracks perfectly for her character, whose entire existence revolves around being the family punching bag, even during episodes supposedly about her. Family Guy gives Bruce a real, messy coming out moment, and next it jumps to Lois, dropping a wild college phase line that sends Peter into full idiot mode. Lois's college experimentation. Lois drops a casual bombshell about her college experimentation with her female roommate Naomi at a 20-year reunion, sending Peter into a delusional threesome fantasy that dominates the entire episode despite having absolutely nothing to do with the actual plot. Partial Terms of Endearment from Season 8 kicks off with Peter and Lois attending her Salve Regina College reunion, where Peter's immediately paranoid about running into Lois's exes. When Naomi Robinson approaches, Lois introduces her as someone she experimented quite a bit in college with, causing Peter to mentally check out of reality and enter what can only be described as a sustained pornographic hallucination. The episode was so controversial that Fox refused to air it in the United States, making it the banned abortion episode that you could only watch on DVD or overseas broadcasts, because apparently American audiences can handle everything except nuanced discussions about reproductive rights. Peter's brain immediately transforms this college revelation into an elaborate fantasy where he's about to participate in a threesome, despite Naomi arriving with her husband Dale and explicitly mentioning a proposal. Peter interprets proposal as code for group intimacy rather than the actual surrogacy request it turns out to be. He spends the entire dinner setup preparing porn scenarios like a deranged method actor, appearing as a pizza delivery guy asking, "Did somebody order sausage?" Then as a college teacher grading midterms, and finally as a Nazi soldier checking train tickets. Each interruption gets progressively more unhinged, while Dale and Naomi are just trying to have a normal conversation about their fertility struggles. Lois has to physically drag Peter away multiple times while apologizing profusely to their guests, which honestly tracks for anyone who's ever had an embarrassing spouse at a dinner party. The actual reveal that Naomi and Dale want Lois to be their surrogate mother crashes Peter's fantasy harder than the stock market in 2008. Peter's immediate response combines confusion, disappointment, and the kind of selfishness that would make Ayn Rand say, "Dude, tone it down." He interrogates them about whose fault the infertility is, asking if Naomi has a bum cervix or if Dale has a bum dong, with all the medical sensitivity of someone who learned anatomy from bathroom graffiti. When Lois agrees to consider the surrogacy, Peter compares her body to a Red Roof Inn, which is somehow both the worst metaphor and perfectly on brand for Peter Griffin's understanding of women's reproductive health care. The rest of the episode pivots completely away from any LGBTQ+ content and becomes a surprisingly earnest abortion debate after Naomi and Dale die in a car accident, leaving Lois pregnant with their embryo. Peter gets radicalized by pro-life protesters outside the clinic because apparently his moral compass has the consistency of Jell-O. He threatens to blow up the abortion clinic, then has a genuine conversation with Lois about the ethics of the situation. The episode ends with them deciding to have the abortion after weighing all factors, which for a Family Guy episode is shockingly mature handling of a complex issue. The immediate aftermath of Peter learning about Lois's college experimentation is him spending the entire evening in a fantasy world that nobody else is participating in. He's so committed to this imaginary threesome that he doesn't hear a single word of the actual conversation happening around him. Brian tries multiple times to explain that Lois only had one experience in college and isn't currently interested in women, but Peter's brain has already written, directed, and cast an entire adult film in his head. The family eventually just leaves him to his delusions because attempting to reason with Peter Griffin mid-fantasy is like trying to teach quantum physics to a goldfish. The long-term impact regarding the LGBTQ+ content is basically nil because the college experimentation gets mentioned once and never addressed again. The show uses it purely as a setup for Peter's misunderstanding, rather than exploring bisexuality or fluid sexuality in any meaningful way, shocking absolutely nobody who's watched Family Guy before. The episode became infamous for being banned in America due to its abortion storyline rather than anything related to the gay content, which perfectly encapsulates America's weird priorities about what's acceptable on television. Years later, the episode remains unavailable on Disney Plus and most streaming platforms, making it the Family Guy equivalent of forbidden fruit. The college experimentation angle was basically just bait to get Peter into his threesome fantasy, which itself was just a vehicle to set up the surrogacy plot, which then became the abortion episode. It's nested premises all the way down, like those Russian nesting dolls, except filled with increasingly uncomfortable subject matter and Peter Griffin's sexual fantasies. Family Guy turns Lois's college phase into a full-blown disaster fantasy about a threesome, and next, the show has Meg pretending to be a lesbian just to finally feel accepted. Meg joins the Lesbian Alliance Club. Meg Griffin discovers that pretending to be a lesbian is the fastest way to make friends at James Woods Regional High School, joining the Lesbian Alliance Club and dating a girl named Sarah before her desperate need for acceptance collides with the reality that she's actually straight. Brian Sings and Swings from Season 4 opens with Peter accidentally hitting Brian with his car, sending the dog to the hospital for surgery. While Brian deals with a near-death experience that spirals him into an existential crisis and a singing career with Frank Sinatra Jr., Meg gets her own subplot that's somehow both progressive and deeply problematic. Sarah, a girl in Meg's science class, invites her to join an after-school club. Meg, thrilled at being included in literally anything, immediately agrees without asking what kind of club it is. Turns out it's the Lesbian Alliance Club, which Meg only discovers after she's already committed. Most people would politely excuse themselves at this point, but Meg is so desperate for friends that she decides to just roll with it and pretend to be gay. The transformation happens instantly. Meg goes from having 0 friends to being part of a social group that actually wants her around, which for Meg Griffin is basically winning the lottery. Neil Goldman, the kid who's been obsessed with Meg for years, congratulates her on finally making sense after all those years of rejecting him, because apparently in Quahog everyone just assumed Meg was a lesbian already. When Meg tries to back out, Sarah mentions they planned a whole party for her, and Meg's desperate need for acceptance kicks into overdrive. She corrects herself mid-sentence, claiming she's a super huge mega lesbian, which is the kind of overcompensation that would make anyone suspicious except these characters apparently. Meg goes all in on the charade, attending Lesbian Alliance Club meetings and watching videos of ballet recitals, because apparently that's what lesbians do in this episode's understanding of gay culture. She even comes out to her family during dinner, dramatically announcing, "Mom, Dad, I am a lesbian," while dressed as a cable guy, for reasons the show never bothers explaining. Peter's immediate response is, "That is awesome," which Lois immediately shuts down before he can finish whatever inappropriate thought he was about to express. Lois, despite being generally oblivious about most things, immediately clocks that Meg is faking and calls her out on it. She accuses Meg of pretending to be something she's not to fit in, comparing it to the time Peter pretended to be racist to get out of jury duty. A flashback involving Peter saying, "Awful lot of honkies in here," to an all-white jury. Things escalate when Lois challenges Meg to prove she's actually gay by kissing her girlfriend. Meg attempts a weak peck, which Lois dismisses as grandma-level affection. Then Lois demonstrates what a real kiss looks like by full-on making out with Sarah herself. Because this episode apparently needed to add "Lois kisses a teenage girl" to the list of uncomfortable Family Guy moments. Sarah very much enjoys this, which raises about 17 different questions that the show has zero interest in answering. Meg storms off, claiming her lesbian friends accept her, which is technically true, but also completely missing the point that acceptance based on lies isn't actual acceptance. Eventually, Meg goes to Sarah's house to come clean about the whole situation. Sarah, misinterpreting Meg's visit, strips down to her underwear, thinking Meg came over for sex, creating maximum awkwardness for everyone involved. Meg finally admits the truth. She's not gay. She only pretended to be a lesbian because for the first time in her life she felt like she belonged somewhere. Sarah asks if Meg chose to be heterosexual, and Meg responds with the line, "I thought being gay wasn't a choice," before Sarah clarifies, "Well, not for guys." This exchange is the show attempting to make a point about sexuality not being a choice, while simultaneously having its main character fake being gay for social acceptance, which is sending extremely mixed messages. Quagmire and a film crew emerge from Sarah's closet at this exact moment, revealing they'd been hiding there hoping to film lesbian activity for Quagmire's creepy video collection. Quagmire fires his cameramen for not getting good footage, which somehow makes this situation even more disturbing than it already was. Meg walks away, having learned that pretending to be someone you're not eventually blows up in your face, though given this is Meg Griffin, she probably could have learned that lesson about 15 different ways by this point in the series. Later seasons occasionally reference this episode when discussing Meg's sexuality, with some writers suggesting she might be bisexual based on this and other moments. The episode tried to make a statement about acceptance and being true to yourself, but it got muddled by having Meg fake being gay while the show also wanted to say that sexuality isn't a choice. It's Family Guy attempting social commentary while also including Quagmire hiding in closets and Lois kissing teenagers, which is basically the show's entire approach to controversial topics in a nutshell. The whole storyline exists in this weird space where it's both surprisingly progressive for 2006 network television and also deeply offensive in ways that feel dated even for that era. Meg fakes being gay just to feel wanted, and next, Stewie swings in with a meltdown/awakening that basically sends him stumbling into realizing he might be into guys. If you like this content, subscribe to our channel. Stewie discovers what gay is. Stewie Griffin spends an entire episode trying to prove he's mature enough to date his ex-girlfriend Olivia by pretending to be a grown-up, enduring a fake marriage that crashes and burns, only to conclude his rant about how annoying women are by accidentally discovering he'd be totally into being gay. Chick Cancer from Season 5 begins with Stewie spotting his ex-girlfriend Olivia Fuller on the news after she gets dropped from the Tasty Juice commercials. He plans to go mock her at a mall appearance with Brian, but the second he sees her in person, all his hatred evaporates because she looks fantastic. California clearly treated her well, and Stewie's immediately smitten again. He asks her to come over for his Bernie Mac night, a show he can't understand but enjoys because it's bright and colorful. But Olivia shoots him down by explaining she's dating more sophisticated, grown-up men now. This sends Stewie into a spiral where he decides the only way to win her back is by proving he's mature enough for her standards. Stewie's interpretation of acting grown-up involves growing pubic hair, which he attempts by gluing Brian's hair from his brush onto his crotch and showing it off to Brian's girlfriend Jillian. He casually hangs out on the couch, letting his fake pubes dangle, asking Brian if he ever just lets his balls hang out while calling him increasingly ridiculous variations of his name. Brian takes his hair back, painfully, and Stewie realizes he needs a different strategy. He observes Quagmire insulting a woman on his front lawn, calling her a fat, old, dirty whore, only to watch her respond positively and go inside with him. Stewie has his eureka moment. Women respond when you treat them like garbage. Armed with this terrible relationship advice, Stewie shows up at Olivia's house and immediately starts insulting her. He calls her ugly, then says when she opened the door, he thought she was Ray Liotta because her skin has the texture of a decorative autumn squash. Somehow this works, and Olivia agrees to go out with him. Their date goes well until they attend a party where Olivia reconnects with Victor, another child actor who's now a pretentious writer, constantly announcing ideas for short stories and novels that are absolutely terrible. Stewie gets jealous and starts acting possessive, which Olivia calls out as jerkish behavior. Things escalate into a pretend marriage that Stewie imagines in his head, complete with coming home from being an astronaut, cowboy, and fireman all in one day to Play-Doh spaghetti for dinner. He complains they're in a sexless marriage, which makes sense given neither of them knows what sex actually is. Stewie guesses it's a kind of cake. The fantasy marriage deteriorates rapidly, with them sniping at each other constantly. At a double-date dinner with Brian and Jillian, Stewie and Olivia fight the entire time about everything from bathroom monopolization to eyebrow waxing. Stewie starts yelling like a baby at another diner, nearly gets into a fight, then calms down enough to ask about the porterhouse steak. The relationship collapses completely when Stewie comes home early from a canceled Chuck E. Cheese Trip, a 4-year-old, died in the ball pit, and catches Olivia with Victor using the silly putty he bought her that weekend. Victor tries to leave, but Stewie suggests the alternate plan where Victor stays and Stewie leaves forever instead. Olivia admits she wanted things to end, confirming what Stewie suspected. Victor delivers his final terrible idea, a farce about a cheating wife and pompous ass burned alive. Stewie's response involves actually setting fire to something, because he's still Stewie Griffin even when heartbroken. Back home with Brian, Stewie processes what just happened and delivers his thesis statement about the entire experience. Being a grown-up sucks. He launches into a complaint about women being a royal pain in the ass, asking why guys can't just hang out with other guys and do romantic stuff together instead of dealing with all this drama. Just live with someone of your own sex and do what you'd normally do with women, but with your buddy. Why don't guys just do that? Brian explains with perfect simplicity, they do, it's called being gay. Stewie's response is immediate and without hesitation. Oh, that's what gay is? Yeah, I could totally get into that. This moment became one of the most referenced exchanges regarding Stewie's sexuality throughout the series. The casualness of his response, treating potential homosexuality like someone just explained a new restaurant concept he'd be willing to try, perfectly captures the show's approach to Stewie's ambiguous orientation. He spent an entire episode learning that romantic relationships with women involve drama, compromise, and emotional labor, and his conclusion is that skipping women entirely sounds great, actually. Years later, this scene gets brought up whenever fans debate Stewie's sexuality. Seth MacFarlane has said Stewie will either grow up to be gay or a very unhappy, repressed heterosexual, and this episode makes a strong case for the former. The whole storyline about trying to act mature enough to date Olivia becomes a vehicle for Stewie to experience and reject heterosexual relationship dynamics in favor of something that sounds way easier, just being with guys. The episode treats his realization with zero judgment or shock, just Brian matter-of-factly explaining what homosexuality is, and Stewie immediately being on board with the concept. Stewie starts realizing he might like guys, and next the show jumps to Quagmire getting his trans dad's old penis in one of its wildest plots. Ida donates her preserved penis. Quagmire loses his penis to a shark attack during a disastrous water skiing trip, sending him into a suicidal depression that gets resolved when his transgender father, Ida, reveals she kept her pre-transition penis in a freezer for years and offers to donate it to him in what might be the most disturbing organ. transplant storyline Family Guy has ever attempted. The unkindest cut, from season 16, opens with the guys attempting to go water skiing on a confiscated police speedboat. Peter spends an absurd amount of time failing to back the boat trailer into the water, creating a traffic jam while everyone yells contradictory driving instructions at him. They eventually just say screw it and launch anyway, because giving up halfway through a terrible plan is basically the quahog way of life. Cleveland refuses to water ski because he doesn't like getting wet, then immediately gets dragged underwater by some kind of horrifying creatures when he falls in, proving that sometimes paranoia is completely justified. While everyone's having fun on the water, Quagmire gets attacked by a shark that specifically targets his penis, because of course that's what happens. The guys watch in horror as the shark bites it clean off, with Peter noting that Quagmire can somehow convince anyone to do that to him, which is both a solid burn and deeply inappropriate timing. They rush him to the hospital, where the doctor delivers the news with maximum awkwardness, even pulling out what looks like Quagmire's penis from under the sheet before revealing he's just messing with him and it's definitely gone. The doctor mentions he does this prank with all his penisless patients, including Liev Schreiber, which raises about 17 questions nobody wants answered. Quagmire spirals hard. His entire identity revolves around sex, and now that option has been completely removed. The guys try helping by blocking porn sites on his computer so he can discover other internet activities like researching birds, but Joe keeps accidentally naming sex-related birds like swallow and titmouse, completely defeating the purpose. Peter suggests Quagmire embrace a new life without a penis by maybe devoting himself to Christ or becoming a eunuch, which Cleveland delivers with way too much enthusiasm before being told to sit this one out. The breaking point arrives during Quagmire's ventriloquism show at the Quahog Playhouse, where he's trying to rebuild his life through his childhood hobby. His dummy Edgar starts telling him to blow his brains out in front of the entire audience, and Quagmire genuinely considers it while holding a gun. Chris is completely confused about whether the dummy or Quagmire is talking, which honestly tracks for Chris's intelligence level. The gun gets passed around between Joe, Cleveland, and Peter as they all contemplate using it for various reasons, with the gun itself offering increasingly dark suggestions to each of them. Enter Ida, who shows up at Quagmire's house with a Yeti cooler. Quagmire thinks that's his gift, but Ida clarifies the cooler is hers, and his actual present is inside, her preserved pre-transition penis that she's been keeping in her freezer next to a snowball from winter. She kept her severed genitalia in food storage for years like some kind of bizarre keepsake, which is either dedication to potential future use or the setup for the world's worst freezer surprise. She offers it to Quagmire for transplant surgery, threatening that if he doesn't take it, she'll give it to Paul Ryan instead, a sentence that probably sounded less insane in the writer's room. Dr. Hartman performs the transplant surgery after everyone washes their hands, except him, successfully attaching Ida's penis to Quagmire. The operation works in the sense that the penis is now attached, though Hartman admits he's not sure about urination or sex actually functioning, which seems like pretty crucial functionality for a penis. Quagmire describes the pain as knives stabbing his crotch, and Hartman casually mentions he can fill a prescription at Goldman's pharmacy before remembering Mort's place is closed, attempting to tie together the episode's B-plot about finding Mort for reward. Eno. Post-surgery, Quagmire reveals that while he's technically having sex again, his dad's penis comes with a 4-inch mole on the left side that looks like a 50-cent piece and a dime kissing each other. Some women find this off-putting, and telling them it's his dad's old penis somehow makes things worse rather than better. The episode ends with Quagmire screaming in agony while trying to urinate, with Peter noting that's just the sound of peeing out your daddy's wiener. This episode represents Family Guy at its most deliberately grotesque, taking the already controversial character of Ida and pushing her into territory that's uncomfortable even by the show's standards. The preserved penis detail suggests Ida either had incredible foresight about potential future donations or just really couldn't let go of her past anatomy. Either way, Quagmire now has his transgender father's genitals permanently attached to his body, which is probably the most literal interpretation of keeping it in the family that television has ever attempted. The whole storyline exists in this weird space where it's simultaneously trying to show Ida as caring and supportive while also treating the entire situation as the punchline to an extended gross-out joke that lasts an entire episode. Quagmire ends up with his trans dad's old penis, and next, the show suddenly tries to get heartfelt again by having Brian date Ida. Brian and Ida rekindle their romance. Brian Griffin decides to publicly date Ida Davis years after their first disastrous encounter, leading to an awkward romance where Ida casually claims transgender privilege to watch porn at bars, and Brian struggles with whether he's ashamed to be seen with a trans woman. Brida from season 18 starts with the guys buying body cameras to wear while drinking so they can remember their million-dollar business ideas the next morning. They review footage from their night out and discover Quagmire hooked up with someone, which gets captured on film and automatically uploaded to the internet. The woman turns out to be Ida, Quagmire's transgender parent, making this the second time she's slept with one of Glenn's friends, the first being the infamous vomiting incident with Brian. In one scene from the footage, a bartender tells Ida she can't watch porn at the bar, and Ida casually responds, "Oh, it's okay. I'm transgender," as if that's a universal hall pass for inappropriate behavior. The bartender immediately backs down with, "Oh, I had no idea. Do whatever you want all the time," which is the show attempting to satirize perceived special treatment while also being kind of offensive about it. Brian runs into Ida at a bar because he's an alcoholic, as he helpfully reminds us, and they bond over Quagmire's public embarrassment. Brian delivers some wisdom about how children need to make their own mistakes to grow, despite not talking to his own son Dylan. Ida appreciates Brian's kindness and points out all his good qualities, like being handsome, loyal, and able to give paw after a couple tries. One thing leads to another, and they end up getting a hotel room together. The next morning, they wake up, and Brian suggests they pretend it never happened and see each other again in another 2 years, maintaining their usual pattern. But then, he surprises himself by actually asking Ida out on a proper date for Friday night. Their relationship develops with Brian clearly struggling about being seen in public with a trans woman. He makes Ida lie down in the back seat while driving, claims she looked tired. He takes her to remote locations to avoid running into anyone they know. When they go to a restaurant, a waiter keeps trying to figure out whether to say, "The fish is for the gentleman and the chicken is for the lady," or vice versa, creating maximum awkwardness. Ida finally calls Brian out on his behavior, pointing out that he seems ashamed to be with her despite claiming otherwise. Brian admits maybe this has been weirder for him than he thought, but then has his growth moment where he publicly declares Ida as his girlfriend to the confused waiter. Back at the Griffin house, Brian announces he has big news and brings Ida over for dinner. The family immediately figures out they're dating before Brian even says anything, because why else would Ida be there? Lois points out Ida has only been to their house maybe twice in her whole life. The family becomes surprisingly supportive, with Chris noting that things that were gross 5 years ago are now heroic, which is the show's meta-commentary on changing social attitudes toward trans people between 2010, when Quagmire's Dad aired, and 2019. The bigger problem is telling Quagmire, who hates Brian with a passion that borders on obsessive. They invite Quagmire over for dinner to break the news, and he does not take it well. Brian tries bonding with Glenn through museum visits and backyard football games, where Brian purposely lets Quagmire score a touchdown and then does an obvious wink sound effect. Quagmire calls him out as a fraud, trying to be his dad, pointing out that Brian is a pompous, pretentious, hypocritical blowhard. He gives Ida an ultimatum: choose between her son and Brian. Ida chooses to talk to Brian. First, brief moment of hope, before explaining that while she's loved their time together, she has to put her son first. Brian understands, and they part ways, with Ida saying she'll never forget what they had. Brian makes one last night at the museum reference that nobody asked for. The episode sits in this uncomfortable space where it's simultaneously trying to show Brian growing past his transphobia from the original episode, while also making Ida the butt of jokes about trans privilege and inappropriate behavior. The bartender scene where Ida uses being trans as an excuse to break rules plays into stereotypes about marginalized groups demanding special treatment. The waiter, struggling with gendered language, could be commentary on awkward social situations, or just another cheap joke, depending on your interpretation. The family's acceptance speech about things being heroic now instead of gross is the show attempting self-awareness about its own problematic history, basically saying, look, we know we were awful before, but we're trying now without fully committing to actual respectful representation. Brian's arc, from shame to acceptance, gets undermined by Quagmire's legitimate complaints about Brian being terrible, making it unclear whether we're supposed to root for this relationship or agree it's doomed from the start. Brian tries to prove he's grown by dating Ida, and next Peter takes it to a whole other level by pretending to be trans just to score workplace perks. If you want more videos like these, subscribe now. Peter pretends to be trans for benefits. Peter Griffin accidentally uses a gender-neutral bathroom at Fenway Park and gets mistaken for being transgender on the Jumbotron, leading him to exploit transgender employee benefits at work before a coma and unwanted surgery force him to learn what being trans actually means through a heart-to-heart with Ida. Trans Fat from season 17 opens with the guys winning tickets to a Red Sox game after Peter films himself pooping in a Yankees helmet, because subtlety has never been Peter's strong suit. At the ballpark, Peter gets tired of waiting in the massive men's room line and decides to use what he thinks is the ladies' room instead. Turns out, it's a gender-neutral bathroom, and when he exits, the Jumbotron displays him as the first transgender Red Sox fan, causing the entire stadium to cheer for his bravery. Peter tries explaining to the guys that he's not transgender, but Cleveland's too distracted by eating Cracker Jacks out of what turns out to be an athletic cup sold by the same prankster who gave Joe ice cream in one earlier. Peter's boss, Angela, calls him into the office the next morning to discuss the incredibly supportive transgender employee benefit package the company offers. Before Peter can clarify the misunderstanding, Angela lists off supplemental time off, an on-site masseuse, and a gift card to Nordstrom Rack. Peter immediately stops listening to anything except benefits and decides to just go with it, quoting Caitlyn Jenner about doing anything for money and attention, which Angela calls so brave in the show's typical sarcastic delivery. Peter says goodbye to the men's room with a nostalgic walk through his greatest bathroom hits, including his crack imprint in wet cement that sealed his butt shut forever, forcing his waist to come out like Play-Doh spaghetti. Brian and Lois immediately call Peter out for trivializing a real struggle, but Peter insists he's part of a movement now. He raids the attic for women's clothes, finding what he thinks is Lois's wedding dress, but turns out to be Meg's murder dress. A detail the show drops casually and never explains. Chris helps Peter get his hair done at a salon during school hours because there was a shooting, another throwaway dark joke. Peter embraces his new identity with enthusiasm, discovering he can say whatever he wants to men without consequence because hitting women is off limits. He tells Joe that Sully could have made it to an airport, challenging the heroism of Captain Sullenberger, gets away with planting evidence that got Joe suspended, and even taunts Chris Brown and Ray Rice about their histories of violence against women. Peter enjoys all the perks of womanhood according to this episode's understanding: white wine lunches with squeaky farts, lean dancing into people's karaoke performances, and generally doing whatever he wants. During one karaoke session at a bar, he gets hit in the head by a fan and goes into a coma. When he wakes up in the hospital, his boss Angela cheerfully informs him that since the company was paying for his medical care anyway, they went ahead and fulfilled his letter of medical intent for sex reassignment surgery. The surgery happened while he was unconscious, and now Peter is officially a woman whether he wants to be or not. This plot development is so absurd it makes the rest of the episode look restrained by comparison. Lois tries helping Peter adjust to life as a woman, teaching him the bedtime routine of crying for no reason, and doing a judgmental scroll through Facebook before drifting off thinking about Rick from Midas Muffler. Peter discovers the downsides of womanhood too. Being unable to sleep after drinking tea late in the day, reading on a blindingly bright iPad while Lois tosses and turns angrily, and dealing with people suggesting you move tables after you've already sat down. His friends abandon him at the restaurant without paying their tab, and Peter realizes how lonely and isolated he feels. Ida finds Peter crying alone and sits down to share her story. She explains her journey from growing up in Football, Texas, getting teased for being different, realizing at age 13 she was a girl trapped in a boy's body, and spending years hiding her secret while becoming a war hero and raising a family. She almost ended her own life from the misery, but couldn't do that to Glenn. Peter admits he had no idea about any of this, and feels terrible for stumbling into the trans identity as a joke when Ida spent her whole life struggling with it. Ida tells him he was a bad person, but taking this journey made him a better man, even though he's currently a woman. The problem is, Peter can't afford the surgery to transition back. Ida helps Peter start a fundraiser, replacing the K in Kickstarter with something the show wisely doesn't specify, and Peter successfully raises enough money for surgery to become a man again. Dr. Hartman declares the operation a success, and Peter immediately celebrates by yelling, "Sully was a hero." The episode ends with an awkward non-crossover with Bob's Burgers, where the cast stands around doing nothing while Peter roasts them for being boring. The whole storyline tried addressing trans issues while simultaneously making every offensive joke possible, landing somewhere between self-aware satire and just plain problematic, depending on your tolerance for Family Guy's brand of boundary pushing. Peter milks being trans for perks and chaos until reality smacks him, and next, Stewie just casually shrugs out a coming out moment at a Star Trek con like it's nothing. Stewie's casual coming out at a Star Trek convention. Stewie Griffin spends an entire Star Trek convention gushing about how Captain Picard would cradle him in his arms through any crisis in any galaxy, prompting Brian to ask if he's queer, which Stewie answers with probably, before immediately moving on, like someone just asked if he wanted fries with that. Not All Dogs Go to Heaven from Season 7 starts at the annual Quahog Star Trek convention, described as the one-day-a-year sci-fi buffs take their lips off the barrel of a loaded gun and spend half a day adjusting their eyes to sunlight, which is both incredibly dark and fairly accurate for how the show views nerd culture. Stewie purchases authentic blueprints to build a Star Trek transporter and debates with Brian about whether Kirk or Picard is the superior captain. This isn't a casual preference for Stewie. He launches into an impassioned defense of Picard that goes way beyond normal fan appreciation and enters territory that makes Brian legitimately question his sexuality. Stewie's explanation of why Picard is better involves zero mentions of tactical brilliance, diplomatic skills, or command decisions. Instead, he focuses entirely on Picard's poise, his quiet acceptance of baldness, and how he projects an aura that says, "I am in command. You are safe with me. I will cradle you in my arms through any crisis in any galaxy." That last part about being cradled in Patrick Stewart's arms is where most people would pump the brakes and reconsider their phrasing. But Stewie just keeps going with the kind of romantic longing usually reserved for Nicholas Sparks novels. Brian, who has spent enough time with Stewie to recognize when something sounds unusually gay, even by Stewie's standards, asks the direct question, "Are you queer?" This is Brian cutting straight through the subtext and just asking what everyone watching was already thinking. The moment has perfect comedic timing because Stewie was so absorbed in his Picard fantasy that Brian's question feels both completely unexpected and totally inevitable at the same time. It's the equivalent of someone spending 20 minutes explaining why they love chocolate cake and then acting surprised when you ask if they want dessert. Stewie's response is the entire reason this moment became legendary in Family Guy history. He doesn't get defensive, doesn't deflect with a joke, doesn't launch into an explanation about the complexity of sexuality. He just says, probably, with the exact same casual tone someone would use to answer, "Do you like pizza?" or "Did you see that movie?" The nonchalance is what makes it perfect. Stewie treats the question like Brian just asked if he prefers paper or plastic bags, immediately accepting the label as a reasonable assessment of his behavior and moving on without any further discussion. The conversation then shifts to LeVar Burton's visor and why anyone would invent such a terrible assistive device, because apparently acknowledging Stewie's probable homosexuality required less processing time than discussing fictional blindness aids. The rest of the episode pivots completely away from Stewie's sexuality and becomes about Meg converting to Christianity after watching too much Kirk Cameron, leading to Brian being outed as an atheist and becoming the most hated person in Quahog, because apparently being an atheist is worse than being an axe murderer in that town. The Stewie moment happens in literally the first 2 minutes and never gets referenced again in the episode. Meanwhile, Stewie spends his B-plot kidnapping the entire cast of Star Trek: The Next Generation, using his homemade transporter, forcing them to answer his questions, and taking them to McDonald's, where they argue about menu items like divorced parents fighting over custody arrangements. Years later, this 5-second exchange became one of the most quoted moments regarding Stewie's sexuality. The probably response gets cited constantly in discussions about whether Stewie is gay, bisexual, or just extremely confused. Seth MacFarlane has gone on record saying Stewie will either grow up to be gay or a very unhappy, repressed heterosexual, and this moment supports the former theory, with Stewie basically shrugging and agreeing that, yeah, queer sounds about right, based on available evidence. The beauty of the moment is how little weight the show puts on it. There's no special music, no dramatic pause, no cutaway gag. Brian asks, Stewie answers. They continue discussing Star Trek. The casualness implies Stewie has already thought about this question before and reached the same conclusion. So Brian asking just confirms what Stewie already suspected about himself. It's Family Guy accidentally doing progressive representation by treating Stewie's sexuality as completely unremarkable and not worth making a big deal about, which somehow feels more genuine than episodes that explicitly try to address LGBTQ+ themes. Stewie casually admits he's probably queer and moves right on with his life, and next he shows up as Desiree like he's been living a whole drag double life on the side this entire time. Stewie's drag queen, alter ego Desiree. Stewie Griffin debuts his drag queen persona Desiree as part of an elaborate scheme to make Jillian jealous of Brian, complete with a fully developed backstory involving coffee shop acquaintances and boot-lending relationships that suggest this isn't Desiree's first rodeo. We Love You, Conrad from Season 7 kicks off with Brian discovering Jillian is getting married to some guy named Derek, which sends him into denial mode about still having feelings for his ex. The episode plays out like a romantic comedy where Brian keeps insisting he's totally over Jillian while simultaneously spiraling into jealous rage every time her wedding gets mentioned. He agrees to a double-date dinner with Jillian and Derek to prove how fine he is with everything, only to discover Derek is literally perfect at everything, including speaking French and helping injured waiters with their elbow problems. Brian even follows Derek into the bathroom to check out his junk, which Stewie correctly identifies as extremely gay behavior, desperate to find some flaw that would make him feel better about losing Jillian to this Superman. After dinner crashes and burns, Brian hooks up with Lauren Conrad from the hills in what appears to be a drunken mistake, only to discover she's secretly a genius, hiding behind a dumb blonde TV persona. She plays violin, reads Plato, conducts biomolecular research, and corrects Brian's mistakes about everything from Monet versus Manet to which admiral won the Battle of Midway. Brian can't handle dating someone smarter than him and eventually realizes he's still in love with Jillian. Lauren, being the secret genius she is, figures this out before Brian does and suggests making Jillian jealous by parading around town with a hot date. This is where Stewie enters the picture, or more accurately, where Desiree makes her grand entrance. Stewie shows up dressed in full drag as Desiree, ready to be Brian's arm candy for the evening. The transformation is complete with wig, makeup, dress, and apparently an entire established social identity that Brian knows nothing about. They head to a restaurant, where Jillian happens to be dining because Lauren planned this whole thing like a military operation. and Desiree immediately commits to the role by introducing herself with maximum theatrical flair. The performance includes Desiree pretending to be super into Brian, though Stewie's understanding of what sounds sexy involves saying things like, "I can't wait till after dinner, 'cause then we'll go home and you can watch me have my period," which is definitely not the vibe they were going for. The real reveal happens when someone named Lee spots them and immediately recognizes Desiree. Lee walks over and greets Desiree like they're old friends, asking, "Hey, is that Desiree?" with the kind of familiarity that suggests they have history. Stewie introduces Brian to Lee, explaining they know each other from Starbucks, which raises about 15 questions the show has zero interest in answering. Does Stewie regularly go to Starbucks in drag? How often does Desiree make appearances that Lee would recognize the persona immediately? The casual nature of the interaction implies this isn't Desiree's debut performance, but rather an established alter ego with her own social circle and coffee preferences. Later in the episode, there's a phone conversation where Jillian calls Lee to discuss borrowing boots, with Lee saying, "Maybe I'll wear them, and maybe I won't," in a playfully flirty tone. This suggests Lee and Jillian are friends, or possibly more, and that Lee exists in Jillian's social world, completely independent of Brian. The fact that Lee knows both Jillian and Desiree creates this weird overlap where Stewie's drag persona has somehow infiltrated multiple social circles without Brian being aware any of this was happening. It's like discovering your roommate has an entire secret life you knew nothing about, except the secret life involves your infant brother dressing in drag and making friends at coffee shops. The whole Desiree subplot gets about 3 minutes of screen time before the episode moves on to Brian crashing Jillian's wedding and getting rejected in front of everyone. Stewie's drag persona doesn't get explored beyond establishing that it exists and has its own social network. The show treats Desiree as completely normal within the context of Stewie's character, just another facet of his ambiguous sexuality that includes crushing on Brian, fantasizing about muscular men, and now apparently maintaining a drag queen identity with standing coffee dates. Years later, fans would reference this episode as evidence of Stewie's queer identity, with Desiree becoming part of the larger conversation about his sexuality. The character appears again in later seasons, most notably in Drag Me to Hell from season 18, where Stewie fully embraces drag culture. But this episode marks Desiree's first appearance, casually introducing the concept that Stewie has been living this double life, complete with ex-boyfriends and Starbucks regulars who know him by his stage name. The episode never makes a big deal about it, treating Stewie's drag persona with the same casual acceptance as any other aspect of his character, which somehow feels more progressive than episodes that explicitly try to make statements about identity and acceptance. Stewie goes from secretly running a drag persona to openly confessing love for Brian in a locked bank vault, proving his life is simultaneously chaotic, theatrical, and heartbreakingly sincere. Brian and Stewie's locked vault love confession. Brian and Stewie get trapped in a bank vault overnight, leading to the most emotionally intimate 22 minutes in Family Guy history, where they get drunk together, pierce Stewie's ear, discuss Brian's suicidal ideation, and exchange explicit declarations of love that would make most romantic comedies look emotionally distant by comparison. Brian and Stewie from season 8 is the show's famous bottle episode, meaning the entire thing takes place in one location with only 2 characters and 0 cutaway gags, which for Family Guy is like asking a stand-up comedian to perform with their mouth taped shut. The setup is deceptively simple. Brian takes Stewie to the bank so he can access his safety deposit box containing a dead bird he wants to show Lois, because that's definitely normal behavior. They bicker about Stewie returning a $3,000 Tom Brown sweater that he calls porte cocherie levels of fancy. The vault door closes automatically at end of business, and suddenly they're locked in until Monday morning because nobody realized banks are closed on Sundays. What follows is basically Marriage Story, but with a baby and a dog instead of Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver. Things start with maximum awkwardness when Stewie immediately craps his diaper out of fear from the door closing, because apparently his fight or flight response involves his bowels. He can't stay in a soiled diaper until Monday without getting a rash, so he proposes a solution that sounds like it came from the deleted scenes of Saw. Brian should eat what's in the diaper, lick it clean, possibly lick Stewie's fanny, then put the diaper back on. Brian's reaction to this suggestion is exactly what you'd expect from someone being asked to consume feces, like it's an appetizer at Applebee's. The negotiation involves Stewie pulling out Brian's gun from the safety deposit box. Wait, he has a gun? And threatening him, which escalates the situation from uncomfortable babysitting duty to hostage negotiation with a tiny terrorist. Brian eventually agrees to do it just to end Stewie's suffering, which is either the most selfless act of friendship in television history or the most disturbing, depending on your perspective. The actual scene happens off-camera in the corner while Stewie looks away because even he finds his own bodily functions gross when someone else is consuming them, which is rich coming from the guy who demanded this happen in the first place. Brian completes the task, throws up, then has to eat the throw-up too because Stewie points out dogs like throw-up anyway. The whole sequence is so aggressively uncomfortable that it makes Scott's tots from The Office look like a pleasant viewing experience. After this monumentally horrifying bonding experience, they try moving past it by pretending nothing happened, which is the emotional equivalent of sweeping a dead body under the rug and hoping nobody notices the smell. Stewie takes a nap while Brian breaks out a bottle of Glenfiddich he's been saving. Stewie discovers this scotch was being saved for Brian's last drink before committing suicide, because apparently Brian keeps a loaded gun in his safety deposit box specifically for ending his own life. This revelation transforms the episode from weird comedy about poop into genuine exploration of depression and suicidal ideation, which is the kind of tonal whiplash that could give you emotional whiplash. They get drunk together on the suicide scotch, which sounds like a terrible craft beer name, with Stewie experiencing his first taste of hard liquor and immediately loving it like a tiny alcoholic discovering his life's purpose. Drunk Stewie decides he wants to pierce his ear, so Brian sterilizes a pin from the Tom Brown sweater and scotch and stabs it through Stewie's earlobe, causing massive bleeding. They're basically playing Edward Forty Hands meets Claire's Accessories, and somehow the ear piercing becomes one of the more wholesome moments of the episode compared to everything that came before it. The drunken bonding turns sour when Brian suggests Stewie doesn't really live in the moment, causing Stewie to lash out with the kind of cruelty only possible when you're hammered and hurt. He claims Brian makes him look queer in the sweater, using it as an insult while also being potentially queer himself. Classic Stewie. Then reveals the ultimate betrayal. He never actually needed his diaper changed, and only made Brian eat his poop because he was bored and wanted to see how low he could get Brian to go. This is friendship manipulation on a level that would make Iago from Othello say, "Dude, too far." Brian realizes the security camera caught everything on tape, and he's going to be immortalized on YouTube as Dog, Baby, Heaney Lick, which is definitely not the legacy anyone wants. They nearly shoot each other with the loaded gun before accidentally firing it into the air and screaming together, which somehow brings them back to sanity. Stewie admits he lied about the poop manipulation just to hurt Brian because Brian hurt him first, revealing that even his cruelty was actually vulnerability in disguise. Then comes the confession that elevates this from standard sitcom fare into something genuinely affecting. Stewie tells Brian he's his only friend, the only person he really cares about, and if he didn't have Brian, he'd be lost. He stumbles through increasingly intense declarations, like someone trying to find the right words for a marriage proposal, saying he really likes Brian, cares a great deal about him, maybe even deeper than that, before finally landing on, "I love you." Brian reciprocates immediately with, "I love you too," explaining that Stewie gives his life purpose, which is massive considering Brian just revealed he keeps a loaded gun specifically for suicide because he can't find meaning in existence. Stewie becomes Brian's reason to live, the thing that makes existence bearable when nothing else does. The episode ends with them cuddled up together while Brian reads David Copperfield aloud, with Stewie getting all snuggled in before Brian begins. After everything they've been through, poop eating, gun threats, emotional manipulation, suicidal confessions, they end up physically cuddled together like a couple on their anniversary. This episode became legendary because it depicts male emotional intimacy with zero shame or ironic distance. Brian and Stewie tell each other "I love you" directly and sincerely, discuss their deepest fears, and end up physically affectionate in ways that transcend typical male friendship boundaries without the show ever making it a joke. Critics praised it for taking risks, and fans still cite it as one of the best episodes because it proves Family Guy can do genuine emotion when it stops hiding behind cutaway gags. The "I love you" exchange became iconic, not because it was played for laughs, but because it was completely sincere. Two characters acknowledging their interdependence without any comedic deflection, protecting them from vulnerability. Also, there's the whole poop eating thing, which definitely happened and can never be taken back. Stewie's casual queerness in public barely scratches the surface of the deeper, more outrageous ways he explores his sexuality behind the scenes. And hey, don't forget to subscribe. Stewie's Gay Sailor musical number. Stewie Griffin launches into a full musical production number about being a fabulous captain of the Queen's Navy who can pirouette on cue and would rather get it on with men than women, all because Peter mentioned going on a cruise to the Bahamas. The Thin White Line from Season 3 is actually a Brian-focused episode about his cocaine addiction after becoming a police drug-sniffing dog, but buried in the middle of all that drama is Stewie, delivering one of his most explicitly gay moments in the entire series. The Griffin family is planning a vacation cruise to the Bahamas after Peter wins a week of paid vacation in a tranquilizer dart contest at work, which is exactly the kind of workplace safety violation you'd expect from a Family Guy company picnic. They're discussing cabin choices between port and starboard, with Peter saying, "Listen to me, I sound like an old salt." This throwaway comment about nautical terminology is apparently all the inspiration Stewie needs to launch into a complete Broadway-style production number. Stewie announces, "I must say, I've always dreamed of a life at sea," before immediately breaking into song as a captain of the Queen's Navy. The number presents him as an effete sailor whose mannerisms get mistaken on the street for someone who can pirouette on cue, which is the show's way of saying everyone already assumes he's gay based on how he carries himself. The song builds through various maritime references and self-aware jokes about his demeanor before landing on the money line. "Well, despite your point of view, I can thrill a girl or two, but I'd rather get it on with you." The phrasing is perfect because it acknowledges that yes, technically Stewie could be with women, but his actual preference is men. He's singing this to an entire ship of military men in his imagination, making it crystal clear who the "you" refers to in that final line. The song ends with Stewie laughing to himself, completely satisfied with his performance, while the family just moves on with planning their vacation, like a baby didn't just announce his sexual preference through interpretive naval-themed choreography. This moment is significant because unlike some of Stewie's other gay moments that involve ambiguity or subtext, this one straight up has him singing about preferring men over women in a musical number. There's no reading between the lines required when someone literally sings, "I'd rather get it on with you," while surrounded by sailors. The show presents it as another quirky Stewie moment, rather than making it a shocking revelation, treating his sexuality as just another aspect of his character alongside his British accent and plans for world domination. The episode completely abandons this thread immediately after the song ends to focus on Brian's cocaine addiction storyline. Peter gets jealous of Brian's success as a drug-sniffing dog, Brian spirals into addiction, the family stages an intervention, and Brian goes to rehab, where Peter shows up pretending to be an addict so he can vacation at the nice facility. Zero follow-up about Stewie's sailor fantasy or his declared preference for men. The musical number exists in complete isolation from the rest of the episode, making it feel like the writers just wanted to sneak in a moment of Stewie being explicitly gay without building an entire plot around it. Years later, this scene gets referenced whenever people compile evidence of Stewie's sexuality. The sailor song is impossible to misinterpret or explain away, as people reading too much into subtext, because Stewie literally states his preference in song form, complete with jazz hands. The fact that the show treats it so casually, with nobody in the family reacting or commenting on what Stewie just sang, actually makes it more progressive than episodes that make a big deal about LGBTQ+ content. Stewie announced he'd rather get it on with men, laughed about it, and the show moved on like this was completely normal information that required no further discussion or explanation. Stewie may revel in fantasizing about men and performing in drag, but his reaction to female nudity proves his attractions are anything but conventional. Stewie's horrified reaction to female nudity. Stewie Griffin gets accidentally left home alone when the family forgets him during their Grand Canyon vacation, leading to him raiding Chris's room and discovering a Hustler magazine that causes such visceral horror he apparently destroys it while declaring, "You can't hurt anyone anymore," like he's exorcising a demon. Baby Not on Board, from Season 7, starts with Peter winning unlimited free gas for a year after threatening to sue a massage parlor, which he uses to buy a space shuttle and eventually take the family on a road trip to the Grand Canyon. The morning of departure happens at 6 a.m., with Peter blowing the horn repeatedly to wake everyone up. Stewie mentions he stayed up all night listening to Persian radio because apparently he's into international broadcasting, making him extra exhausted when they load into the car. Everyone piles in with their stuff. Peter brings his entire tropical bird collection, despite Lois's objections, and they drive off into the sunrise, completely forgetting that Stewie is still in the house. Stewie wakes up hours later to discover he's completely alone in an empty house. His first instinct is to call for Lois repeatedly, then try to get her attention by announcing he's about to drink his first soda, knowing she'd normally rush to stop him. When nobody shows up, he actually drinks the soda and experiences his first sugar rush, suddenly wanting to run around and then immediately crashing into sadness, which is basically the toddler experience in a nutshell. Once he realizes the family genuinely abandoned him, Stewie decides to explore the house without supervision and do all the things he normally can't do. His first stop is messing with Brian's novel by replacing every instance of the word "and" with the word "fart," which produces sentences like, "The young soldier fart his brother looked at each other, and they would both emerge, stay farting on their feet." The editing project amuses him until he realizes some replacements don't work grammatically, at which point he moves on to his next target, raiding Chris's room for forbidden treasures. Stewie announces he's going to see what fascinating pubescent treasures Chris has got hidden away, which sounds like the beginning of a heist movie, except the treasure is teenage boy contraband. He discovers Chris has a Hustler magazine stashed somewhere, and Stewie gets genuinely excited about finally seeing female anatomy. He opens it saying, "I finally get to see what a vagina looks," and then immediately cuts himself off with, "Oh God, oh my God, oh my God." The horror in his voice escalates with each repetition, suggesting whatever he saw was deeply traumatic to his sensibilities. The transcript then shows him saying, "You can't hurt anyone anymore," which implies he's destroyed or disposed of the magazine in some violent fashion, treating it like a dangerous artifact that needs to be neutralized for the safety of humanity. The reaction is significant because Stewie is actively horrified and repulsed to the point of needing to eliminate the source. Most kids stumbling onto adult magazines would be curious, embarrassed, or maybe grossed out in that general, "adults are weird" way. But Stewie treats the Hustler like it's cursed material that posed an existential threat. His dramatic declaration about it not being able to hurt anyone anymore suggests he sees heterosexual pornography as something actively harmful that he's heroically vanquished. The rest of the episode follows Stewie trying to survive alone without diapers or food, eventually getting a job at McBurgertown before getting fired for stealing a fish sandwich past its throw-out time. He ends up broke, jobless, and wearing Meg's hats while lamenting that his life was better with his family around. Meanwhile, the Griffins realize they forgot Stewie after stopping at Ground Zero in New York, where Peter thinks it's where the first guy got AIDS, before Lois corrects him about 9/11, and they struggle to get home while Cleveland and Quagmire get trapped in Stewie's basement watching the DirecTV Help channel on repeat. The Hustler magazine moment gets buried in the middle of Stewie's Home Alone storyline and never referenced again, but it's one of the clearest examples of Stewie being repulsed by female sexuality. The show doesn't just have him shrug and move on, he actively destroys the magazine like he's protecting the world from its existence. Combined with all his other moments of attraction to men and disinterest in women, this scene adds to the mountain of evidence, suggesting Stewie's sexuality definitely doesn't include being attracted to women. The episode treats it as a throwaway gag in Stewie's solo adventure, but the visceral horror he expresses toward female nudity speaks volumes about his preferences, especially when contrasted with how comfortable he is discussing attraction to male characters throughout the series. Stewie's horror at female nudity may make him seem prudish, but his accidental flagpole discovery proves he's already exploring physical pleasure on his own terms. Stewie's flagpole discovery. Stewie Griffin gets launched up a greased pole as part of a fulcrum physics experiment by Meg and Chris, leading to an unexpectedly pleasurable experience that he immediately wants to repeat in private. Death Lives from Season 3 is primarily about Peter having a near-death experience, where Death himself shows Peter key moments from his past to help him realize he's neglecting Lois on their anniversary. The main plot involves Peter ditching his anniversary with Lois to play golf while sending her on a fake scavenger hunt, eventually learning through flashbacks that he once turned down $1 million just to be with Lois and needs to appreciate her more. Stewie's flagpole moment happens as a quick scene during Lois's scavenger hunt adventure with the kids. Peter left clues around town for Lois to follow, so she'd stay busy while he played golf at Barrington Country Club. One of the notes ends up attached high on a greased pole that Peter set up specifically to make it difficult to reach. Chris immediately identifies the problem, saying, "How do we get up there? Dad put grease on the pole," which is Peter's idea of romantic anniversary planning apparently. Meg, being the responsible older sibling who actually pays attention in school, announces she knows how to solve this problem using physics. She explains they've been studying fulcrums in class and demonstrates how to counterbalance weight at the point where a lever pivots. Before anyone fully understands what she's planning, Meg asks Stewie if he wants to play rocket ship. Stewie, having zero context for what's about to happen, responds with confusion before suddenly getting catapulted upward as the counterweight in Meg's improvised lever system. He initially protests with, "How dare you use me for your own personal selfish," before trailing off as he realizes something unexpected is happening. The key moment arrives when Stewie's tone completely changes mid-sentence. He makes a contemplative, sound, then says, "Oh, pull slower. I must remember to do this game when no one's around." The implication is crystal clear. The physical sensation of being pulled up the pole, while his diaper rubs against it, has created an experience Stewie finds unexpectedly pleasurable. His immediate mental note to remember this game for private recreation later suggests he's accidentally discovered a form of physical stimulation he wants to explore further without an audience. The scene lasts maybe 10 seconds total, before the show moves on to the next part of the scavenger hunt. Nobody comments on what Stewie just said, Lois doesn't react, and the moment gets buried under the continued chaos of the anniversary plot. It's treated as another throwaway Stewie moment in an episode stuffed with them, but the sexual undertone is unmistakable. The show basically had a baby discover masturbation via physics experiment and then immediately moved on like this was completely normal content for a Sunday night cartoon. This moment fits into the larger pattern of Stewie's character having surprisingly mature awareness of physical pleasure despite being an infant. Throughout the series, he makes various comments and displays behaviors that suggest he's far more sexually aware than any baby should be, though the show rarely addresses this directly. The flagpole scene is notable because it's one of the few times Stewie discovers something physical that he explicitly plans to revisit privately, treating it like a teenager who just figured out something interesting happens when they adjust the shower head. The episode never returns to this plot thread. Stewie doesn't mention the flagpole game again, nobody brings it up, and the show pretends it never happened. The rest of the episode focuses on Death taking Peter through his romantic history with Lois, showing him their first meeting, his proposal, and the time he rejected $1 million from her father just to stay with her. Peter learns to appreciate Lois more, surprises her by having Peter Frampton perform their song, and Death goes on an awkward date with Amy from the pet store. Stewie's brief moment of self-discovery gets lost in the shuffle of the main storyline. Years later, fans occasionally reference this scene as another example of Family Guy's willingness to make jokes about infant sexuality that probably shouldn't exist. The moment works because it's so quick and understated that you could easily miss it if you're not paying attention, but once you catch it, the implication is impossible to ignore. Stewie basically announced he discovered something that feels good and plans to do it again privately, which is about as explicit as the show could get, while still maintaining plausible deniability about what they were actually suggesting. Stewie's private experiments with physical pleasure set the stage for him taking bold, romantic risks with Brian, turning spy work into a personal love mission. Stewie asks Brian on a date after their surveillance kiss. Stewie Griffin uses a surveillance mission as an excuse to kiss Brian, then immediately asks him out on a date with "freakin' shot in the dark. You want to do something sometime?" Making the whole operation feel less like detective work and more like Stewie manufacturing romantic situations. Deep Throats from Season 4 follows Brian trying to expose Mayor Adam West as corrupt after getting slapped with a $400 parking ticket. He recruits Stewie to help investigate, discovering that West is secretly dating Meg. They stake out a motel where West and Meg are having their completely innocent, age-appropriate meetings. West promises to wait until she's 18 or 21, or maybe 25, when she can legally rent a car, which is both sweet and deeply concerning, depending on your interpretation. Brian and Stewie need photographic evidence of the relationship to expose the scandal. They're waiting outside the motel room when Brian spots West and Meg about to leave. He panics, realizing they need cover, and tells Stewie, "Here they come. Kiss me." This is standard spy movie protocol, where undercover agents pretend to be a couple to avoid detection, except it's a baby and a dog, which raises about 17 questions nobody wants to answer. What makes the moment significant isn't the kiss itself, which happens off-screen, but what comes immediately after. West and Meg pass by their hiding spot, and Brian says, "Come on, we gotta follow them," ready to continue the mission. But Stewie lingers, processing what just happened. Brian notices and asks, "Stewie, everything all right?" Stewie responds with, yeah, before delivering the line that transforms the whole interaction. "Hey, listen, freaking shot in the dark. You want to do something sometime?" He's asking Brian out on a date, not as a joke, not as part of the surveillance operation, but as a genuine romantic proposition immediately following their kiss. The phrasing, "freakin' shot in the dark," suggests Stewie knows this is risky, that Brian might reject him, but he's shooting his shot anyway because the kiss gave him an opening. Brian doesn't respond to the question. The scene cuts immediately to Peter and Lois getting high and wanting to make cookies, completely abandoning the Stewie-Brian moment without resolution. The show treats it like a throwaway joke, but the implications are massive. Stewie just used a stakeout as an excuse to kiss Brian, then immediately tried to parlay that into an actual date. That's not subtext. That's just text with a thin veneer of plausible deniability. The rest of the episode focuses on Brian deciding not to expose the Mayor-Meg relationship after realizing it would ruin Meg's life, and Peter and Lois losing a talent show because they performed while extremely high on marijuana, leading to Chris delivering an after-school special speech about THC, damaging your brain. Stewie's attempted date with Brian never gets mentioned again, leaving it as one of those moments that exists in Family Guy limbo where it definitely happened, but nobody will ever acknowledge it. The scene works because it captures Stewie's character perfectly, opportunistic, manipulative, but also genuinely vulnerable when it comes to Brian. He manufactured a situation where kissing Brian was necessary for the mission, then immediately tried to turn that manufactured moment into something real. That's either romantic or deeply calculating depending on your interpretation, and knowing Stewie, it's probably both simultaneously. He's not above using spy work as an excuse to make out with Brian, and he's definitely not above asking Brian on a date immediately afterward while Brian is still processing what just happened. Years later, Fans cite this as another example of Stewie's feelings for Brian, part of the long-running ambiguous relationship between them that the show never fully commits to or denies. The moment gets overshadowed by the Megmare West plot and the marijuana PSA ending, but it's there in the transcript, preserved forever, as the time Stewie kissed Brian during a stakeout and then asked him out like they were teenagers at a school dance instead of a baby and a dog investigating political corruption. Stewie's bold romantic move with Brian quickly shifts back to playful humiliation, showing how their dynamic can swing from vulnerability to manipulation in an instant. Keep watching and make sure to subscribe. Brian tricks Stewie into performing Yahtzee flamboyantly. Brian Griffin convinces Stewie that the proper way to play Yahtzee involves shouting the game's name while flapping your wrists dramatically, then refuses to participate himself and calls Stewie gay for doing exactly what Brian told him to do. No Meals on Wheels, from Season 5, focuses mainly on Peter opening a restaurant that becomes popular with disabled people, leading him to ban them because they're not cool enough, which is somehow not the worst thing Peter's ever done. The Stewie-Brian moment happens early in the episode as a quick scene showing the two of them playing board games at home, completely unrelated to the restaurant plot or Peter's war against Joe and the wheelchair-using community. Brian sets up the con by explaining the rules with complete sincerity. He tells Stewie, "We roll the dice and then we both have to yell, 'Yahtzee,' really loud." When Stewie asks at the same time, Brian confirms this is correct procedure. Then comes the critical addition, and you have to flap your wrists like this. Brian demonstrates an exaggeratedly effeminate wrist-flapping gesture, the kind of stereotypical movement that gets associated with flamboyant gay men in every offensive comedy routine since the dawn of time. Stewie, being trusting and also genuinely unsure how board games work, remember, he's technically a baby despite his vocabulary and world domination schemes, asks, "And you'll do it, too?" This is the moment where Brian could come clean, but instead, he doubles down with, "Of course, that's how it's done." He's selling this lie so confidently that Stewie has no reason to doubt him. After all, board game rules can be arbitrary and weird. Who's to say Yahtzee doesn't require theatrical hand movements? They roll the dice, and Brian asks, "You gonna do with me?" To which he responds to his own question with, "Oh yeah," providing one final false reassurance. Stewie commits fully to the performance, shouting, "Yahtzee," while doing the exaggerated wrist flaps exactly as Brian demonstrated. And then Brian just sits there, completely still, not participating at all, before delivering his punchline, "Gay." Stewie's immediate response is, "You suck," because he just got played harder than anyone in the history of board games. Brian manufactured an entire scenario specifically to trick Stewie into doing something stereotypically feminine, then immediately labeled it as gay and refused to do it himself. That's some psychological warfare disguised as game night. The whole interaction took maybe 15 seconds of screen time before the show moved on to Peter's restaurant storyline, treating it as disposable comedy rather than acknowledging Brian just manipulated Stewie into performing queerness as a joke. The scene captures their dynamic perfectly. Brian is smarter and more worldly. Stewie is naive despite his intelligence, and Brian occasionally uses that naivety for his own amusement. What makes this particular trick notable is how specifically it targets Stewie's sexuality. Brian didn't trick him into looking stupid or clumsy, he tricked him into performing an exaggeratedly gay gesture, then called him gay for doing it. Given all the other moments throughout the series where Stewie displays attraction to men or engages in queer-coded behavior, this reads less like random pranking and more like Brian needling something he's noticed about Stewie's character. The episode never returns to this moment. Peter opens his restaurant, Big Pete's House of Munch, with the $50,000 they found under their carpet. The place becomes popular with disabled patrons after Joe brings his wheelchair-using friends. Peter bans disabled people because they're not cool. Joe and the other wheelchair users form Crippletron, a Voltron, parody made of people in wheelchairs, to attack Peter. And Peter learns his lesson after spending 2 weeks in a wheelchair himself. Zero follow-up on Brian tricking Stewie into flamboyant gestures or calling him gay for performing them. The moment exists in that weird Family Guy space, where it's simultaneously a throwaway joke and also part of the larger pattern of Stewie's queerness throughout the series. Brian clearly knows something about Stewie that makes this specific prank land differently than it would with Chris or Meg. You don't trick someone into performing stereotypically gay gestures unless you think there's already something there to mock. The fact that Brian follows it up with the single word gay rather than gotcha or fooled you makes the target of the joke extremely clear. This particular interaction gets referenced less frequently than Stewie's other queer moments, probably because it's meaner-spirited than most. Stewie asking Brian out after kissing him during surveillance feels romantic. Stewie singing about preferring men in his sailor song feels like self-expression, but Brian tricking Stewie into flamboyant gestures, then calling him gay, feels like bullying. The power dynamic makes it uncomfortable in ways the other moments aren't, which might explain why the show buried it in the middle of an episode about restaurant ownership and disability discrimination rather than making it a memorable scene worth discussing. Just when Stewie's romantic feelings nearly slip out during ballroom dancing, Brian finds a new way to humiliate him under the guise of a board game. Stewie's deathbed I love you to Brian. Stewie Griffin thinks he's dying from skin cancer after a disastrous tanning addiction, so he creates a bucket list that includes ballroom dancing with Brian, leading to an accidental I love you confession that Stewie immediately tries to take back by claiming he said olive juice. The Tan Aquatic with Steve Zissou from Season 5 starts with Peter taking Stewie golfing on a scorching day without any sunscreen, because Peter's parenting skills have all the foresight of someone who thinks fire extinguishers are optional. Stewie gets horrifically sunburned, turning into what he describes as a young Eartha Kitt when he sees his reflection. But instead of learning his lesson, Stewie becomes obsessed with tanning, transforming into one of those people whose entire personality revolves around maintaining their bronze glow like it's a full-time job. Stewie spends the episode hosting pool parties, doing his tan walk, and spreading his legs wider than necessary in what he calls his recumbent tan pose, because apparently being tan requires maximum anatomical exposure. He draws a pencil mustache on himself, explaining he likes it because it's the kind of mustache that says, "Yeah, I've been nude on camera. What of it?" Brian watches this descent into vanity with increasing concern, particularly when Stewie announces tanning as a lifestyle, which is the kind of statement that should immediately trigger an intervention. The tanning obsession crashes when Stewie stays in the sun for 6.5 hours after Brian forgets to wake him up. The sunburn is so catastrophic that Stewie can't even stand, screaming for Brian to get the lotion while Mr. Furley from Three's Company walks in on the scene and immediately backs out, which honestly tracks as the appropriate response. After recovering from the burn, Stewie starts peeling and discovers a mysterious mole that wasn't there before. Brian drops the bombshell that it could be cancer, causing Stewie to spiral into existential panic about dying before he's accomplished anything meaningful in his life, which is fair, given he's technically still a baby, who hasn't even mastered potty training. Doctor. Hartman examines the mole and says it looks benign, but they won't know for sure until tests come back in a few days. Stewie responds with appropriate hysteria, pointing out that Jim Henson had a wait-and-see attitude, and now the Muppets sound wrong, followed by a cutaway of Swedish Chef talking like a regular person, which is genuinely disturbing. Convinced he only has 1 week left to live, Stewie creates a bucket list of things he needs to accomplish before cancer takes him. Brian, feeling guilty since this is technically his fault for letting Stewie get overcooked in the sun, agrees to help complete every item. The list includes visiting the Chicago Museum of Art and learning to ballroom dance, both of which they accomplish together in a montage that's surprisingly sweet for an episode mostly about Peter beating up children. The ballroom dancing scene is where everything shifts from bucket list completion to romantic confession. They're dancing together with Brian leading, after Stewie initially insists he should lead before conceding, and they're having what appears to be a genuine moment of connection. Then Stewie says it, "I love you," Brian immediately stops dancing and asks what Stewie just said, because you can't just drop an "I love you" during ballroom practice and expect nobody to notice. Stewie panics and claims he actually said "olive juice," not "I love you," which is that old trick where you mouth words that look identical. Brian, either buying the excuse or deciding not to push the issue, responds with "olive juice, you too," and they continue dancing. The moment passes without further acknowledgement, buried under the excuse of visual lip-reading confusion. The beauty of this scene is how Stewie's immediate backpedaling makes the confession even more genuine. He wasn't trying to be dramatic or manipulative. He just accidentally let his actual feelings slip out during an intimate moment and then immediately tried to shove them back in like someone who opened a door they weren't supposed to. The olive juice cover story is paper thin, the kind of excuse you make when you're desperately trying to unsay something you absolutely meant but weren't ready to admit. Brian's decision to play along suggests he either genuinely didn't hear it correctly or chose to give Stewie an out rather than forcing him to confront feelings he's not ready to process. The episode wraps up with Stewie discovering he doesn't actually have cancer and the mole was benign, making his entire existential crisis and bucket list unnecessary. Brian suggests they finish the memoir Stewie was dictating anyway, including the philosophical musings about squiggly lines and eye fluid, but Stewie calls him the worst type of person for trying to capitalize on fake terminal illness. The "I love you" moment never gets referenced again, joining the long list of Stewie-Brian romantic moments that exist in permanent limbo, where they definitely happened but nobody will ever discuss them. This scene fits perfectly into the pattern of Stewie's feelings for Brian throughout the series. He's comfortable being physically intimate, ballroom, dancing, emotionally vulnerable, thinking he's dying, and accidentally honest, the confession. But the second those feelings become explicit, he retreats behind whatever excuse is available. The episode uses the cancer scare as a vehicle for Stewie to express emotions he normally keeps buried, then immediately resets to status quo once the threat passes. It's Family Guy's standard approach to Stewie's sexuality and his relationship with Brian. Acknowledge it exists, let it surface briefly, then pretend it never happened until the next time the writers feel like poking at it. Just as Stewie nearly exposes his true feelings for Brian, next he faces the harsh reality of heartbreak with his first infatuation at daycare. Stewie's first heartbreak over cookie-loving Janet. Stewie Griffin falls genuinely in love with a girl named Janet at daycare, experiencing the full romantic arc from initial resistance to passionate declaration to devastating heartbreak when he discovers she only wanted him for his cookies. Damn it, Janet. From Season 2, listed as 2x15, not S3E16, opens with Lois deciding Stewie needs to socialize with other children after watching him bury a kid named Jeffrey in the sandbox. Peter suggests giving Stewie a hobo pack and sending him on the road with a can of beans and a pocket full of dreams, which is somehow not the worst parenting advice he's given. Lois ignores this and enrolls Stewie in daycare, leading to one of the most genuinely romantic storylines the show ever gave him that doesn't involve Brian. Stewie's first reaction to daycare is assuming it's a biogenetic experimentation facility, because that's where his mind goes. And he desperately tries negotiating with Lois by claiming his previous murder threats were shtick. When she leaves anyway, Stewie finds himself surrounded by other children playing Duck Duck Goose, which he immediately weaponizes by tackling Brad so hard the kid starts crying. The daycare worker scolds him with, "This is exactly why people don't respect the WNBA," which is both oddly specific and completely unrelated to anything happening. The turning point arrives when Janet approaches Stewie and offers him a cookie. His initial interaction involves stammering through multiple attempts at saying hello before telling his teddy bear Rupert that Janet has curly ebony locks and those pouty come-hither lips that he finds completely unappealing, classic denial. Rupert immediately clocks what's happening and suggests Stewie is in love, which Stewie vehemently denies while accidentally proving Rupert's point by remembering Janet's eye color incorrectly during the argument. Stewie tries maintaining his cynical worldview about women being wicked creatures, who precipitated the downfall of history's most powerful men, declaring he wants nothing to do with love. Then Janet walks over, and his entire facade crumbles. He stammers through, introducing himself, offers multiple nickname options, including Snake Griffin, and when she asks for his cookie, he gives it to her immediately, while making a terrible pun about cookies crumbling. He admits to Rupert afterward that Cupid has pierced him with "thine sweet, searing arrow," which is possibly the most romantic thing Stewie has ever said about anyone who isn't Brian or a muscular celebrity. The relationship develops with Stewie experiencing all the classic symptoms of being in love. He can't sleep thinking about Janet, he gets tongue-tied whenever she's around, and he starts making future plans involving dancing, Christmas mornings, and arguments over disciplining their children, because Stewie plans relationships like someone drafting a prenup before the first date. When he sees Janet talking to another girl named Melinda, Stewie gets jealous and tries making her jealous back by complimenting Melinda's tight butt, while Janet walks by completely unbothered. The confession scene happens during playtime when Stewie works up the courage to tell Janet his feelings. He stammers through, explaining that when he's with her, he feels something he can't quite describe, before accidentally proposing marriage by pretending to ask for a blanket. When a flight attendant, the episode's B-plot involves Lois becoming a stewardess, misunderstands and says yes to his blanket request, Stewie declares they're officially engaged and demands to touch her face, which is definitely not how proposals work, but tracks for Stewie's understanding of social conventions. Back at daycare, Stewie finally has his moment with Janet. He tells her how beautiful she is, discusses their bright future together, and talks about all the cookies they'll have, not realizing this is foreshadowing. Janet's response is simply, "Cookie?" And Stewie interprets this as her agreeing to everything, rather than what it actually means. She wants the cookie he's currently holding. The relationship appears to be going great until Stewie catches Janet playing with Melinda and realizes Janet barely acknowledges him anymore. The heartbreak arrives when Stewie confronts Janet about whether she actually has feelings for him or if he's the only one invested in this relationship. She responds by saying, "Cookie?" again, and suddenly everything clicks into horrible focus. Janet never cared about Stewie at all. She just wanted his cookies. She's been using him this entire time as a cookie supplier, and every interaction they had was her strategically positioning herself for maximum snack access. Stewie's devastated realization that it's always been the damn cookies leads to him dramatically declaring the bakery just closed and telling her to get her fill somewhere else, calling her an oatmeal raisin-loving tart before breaking down. The episode ends with Stewie telling himself not to let Janet see him cry, walking away with whatever dignity he has left after discovering his first love was purely transactional. The show never returns to this plot thread, and Janet presumably continues her cookie acquisition schemes with other emotionally vulnerable toddlers. Meanwhile, the B-plot resolves with Peter and Lois getting stuck in Cuba after Peter's free flight exploitation leads to a hijacking, because this episode needed two separate storylines about relationships based on using people for personal gain. This episode is significant because it's one of the few times Stewie shows genuine romantic interest in a girl without any ambiguity about his sexuality. He experiences the full emotional journey of falling in love, making grand gestures, planning a future together, and getting his heart absolutely demolished. The Janet storyline proves Stewie is capable of romantic feelings regardless of gender, though the traumatic cookie betrayal probably didn't help his future relationship prospects. The episode gets referenced occasionally when discussing Stewie's sexuality, with some fans pointing to it as evidence he's attracted to women, while others argue it's just proof he's capable of emotional attachment to anyone, regardless of gender, as long as they're not secretly using him for baked goods. After Stewie learns the bitter lesson of love and betrayal with Janet, next he prepares to reveal a truth about himself that Thanksgiving and Peter refuse to let anyone hear. Hit subscribe for more content like this. Stewie's interrupted coming out speech. Stewie Griffin begins delivering what appears to be a coming out speech at Thanksgiving dinner, declaring himself a proud, unashamed, active, before Peter bursts through the door with a turkey and completely derails the moment. Turkey Guys, from season 13, centers on Peter and Brian's disastrous quest to replace the Thanksgiving turkey they drunkenly ate the night before, leading to a series of catastrophes including a car lake drowning, bus expulsion, bike chain breaking, and armed turkey robbery. Meanwhile, back at the Griffin house, Lois is desperately stalling for time while hosting increasingly impatient Thanksgiving guests. Chris has been put in charge of hosting duties because Peter's absence makes him the man of the house, according to Stewie. But he immediately gets drunk off the pressure and starts singing Irish songs about deep sadness. The dinner delay creates maximum awkwardness as Lois forces her father to tell increasingly rambling stories about how things used to be better, covering topics like there being too much candy nowadays. There used to be only 4: bullseyes, yahoos, sweet yarn, and cigarettes. Ball players not wearing giant woolen shirts anymore, and wishing things were still heavy. The guests are starving, irritated, and ready to abandon all pretense of holiday cheer. Someone mentions having an interesting factoid about what makes you sleepy afterwards, which is the kind of conversation-killing statement that signals Thanksgiving has officially died. Finally, someone breaks and demands they just eat already. Lois reluctantly agrees that since Peter obviously isn't coming back, they should start without him. This is where Stewie sees his opportunity. He stands up and announces that obviously Peter's not here, so it's fallen to me to take up the mantle. Everyone assumes he's about to give the traditional Thanksgiving toast that the host normally delivers, thanking everyone for coming and listing things they're grateful for, the standard wholesome holiday speech that happens in every family gathering. But Stewie takes the moment in a completely different direction. He explains he wasn't planning on doing this today, but looking around at all the open, loving faces of friends and family, he feels comfortable enough to finally say something important. The phrasing is classic coming out language, the emphasis on feeling safe and supported, the acknowledgement that this is unplanned but feels right, the setup that what's coming is significant and personal. Stewie declares, "I am a proud, unashamed, active," and that's as far as he gets before Peter crashes through the door screaming, "Lois, we're home and Thanksgiving is saved," while carrying a live turkey. The moment shatters completely. Whatever Stewie was about to confess gets buried under Peter's dramatic entrance and the chaos of explaining why they brought a living turkey to Thanksgiving dinner instead of a cooked one. Nobody asks Stewie to finish his sentence, nobody circles back to what he was saying, and the show moves on like the interruption never happened. The comedic timing is perfect because the audience is left hanging on whatever Stewie was about to reveal. The setup was unmistakably a coming-out speech, using all the traditional phrasing and emotional beats that signal someone is about to make a major personal declaration. Proud, unashamed, active could lead to any number of revelations about his identity or sexuality, but we'll never know because Peter's turkey rescue mission took priority over Stewie's emotional vulnerability. The scene works on multiple levels. For viewers who've been following Stewie's ambiguous sexuality throughout the series, this feels like the moment the show might finally commit to explicitly addressing it. The fact that it gets interrupted is both hilarious and frustrating, maintaining the status quo while acknowledging that yes, Stewie was definitely about to say something significant about his identity. The show gets to have its cake and eat it too, making a joke about Stewie coming out while never actually having him come out. The episode never returns to this moment. After Peter's entrance, the focus shifts entirely to whether they're going to kill the turkey for dinner. Spoiler, drunk Chris does it with a shotgun 4 years after divorcing Lois and Stewie dying, according to Peter's bizarre narration. Whatever Stewie was ready to confess remains forever unspoken, joining the long list of almost moments where the show dances around his sexuality without committing. This scene became another data point in the ongoing discussion about Stewie's character. The interrupted coming out is such a specific setup that it's impossible to argue he was about to say anything else. You don't use phrasing like proud, unashamed, active, followed by a dramatic pause, unless you're announcing something about identity. The show knew exactly what it was doing by structuring the moment this way, using the interruption as a way to acknowledge the elephant in the room while maintaining plausible deniability about never explicitly confirming anything about Stewie's sexuality. After Stewie's Thanksgiving speech gets sabotaged, next he misreads the Winter Olympics entirely, insisting he's not gay while openly comparing himself to Tara Lipinski. Stewie denies being gay while comparing himself to Tara Lipinski. Stewie Griffin becomes obsessed with figure skating commentator Tara Lipinski during the Winter Olympics, claiming she's his soulmate because she looks like a baby and she's best friends with a gay guy, then immediately insists, "I'm not gay," when Brian points out the obvious implication. The Griffin Winter Games from season 17 follows the family to the Winter Olympics in Korea after Meg qualifies for the biathlon, which combines cross-country skiing and rifle shooting, because apparently Meg has been training for years and nobody noticed. Peter immediately proves he can do what Meg does, gets challenged by her former voice actress, Lacey Chabert, and somehow Meg ends up winning her qualifier while the family prepares for an international trip. The episode splits between multiple storylines: Peter getting kidnapped by North Korea, Meg's Olympic dreams, and Stewie falling desperately in love with Tara Lipinski. Stewie spots Tara at the Olympics and becomes instantly infatuated, dragging Brian over to meet her and her commentary partner, Johnny Weir. He gushes about being a huge fan and compliments the shape of Tara's head, which people apparently give her grief about, comparing it to a football. Tara graciously accepts the compliment while Johnny encourages Stewie by saying, "Nothing normal looks good," which is either genuinely supportive or the kind of backhanded wisdom that only works coming from someone as flamboyant as Johnny Weir. After their initial meeting, Stewie can't stop talking about how amazing Tara is. He tells Brian, "I can't believe I'm on a first-name basis with Tara Lipinski," then asks Brian to refresh his memory about whether Tara is the one who had the DUI. Brian corrects him that it was Oksana Bayul, leading to Stewie making a Gandalf joke about her name sounding like something you yell at the foot of a mountain before a door opens. Then comes the critical moment. Stewie declares that Tara Lipinski is his soulmate, and Brian challenges this immediately with, "How is she your soulmate?" Stewie's response reveals everything about how he sees himself. "She looks like a baby, and she's best friends with a gay guy. Her life is my life." He's directly comparing himself to Tara, identifying with both her appearance, baby-like, which tracks since he is literally a baby, and her social dynamic being best friends with a gay man, which would be Brian in this comparison. Brian's response is immediate and defensive. "I'm not gay." This forces Stewie into an uncomfortable position because his comparison only works if either he's gay or Brian is gay. If Stewie is comparing himself to Tara, who is best friends with gay Johnny Weir, then Brian would be the gay best friend in that equation. But if Brian isn't gay, then the comparison breaks down unless Stewie himself is the gay one. His response is telling, "Well, it's not me." This exchange is Stewie explicitly denying being gay, while simultaneously identifying with someone whose defining characteristic, according to him, is being best friends with a gay man. The denial is defensive and immediate, suggesting he's uncomfortable with the label, even though he's the one who brought up the comparison in the first place. He wants to claim kinship with Tara's life situation without accepting the logical implications of that comparison. The rest of the episode explores Stewie's crush on Tara, including an elaborate fantasy sequence where he imagines asking her to dance on the ice, which actually goes hilariously wrong with him, biting his tongue and swallowing the piece before crawling off the ice in pain. The reality of their relationship is that Tara sees Stewie as her gay friend, treating him with the casual affection she'd give any platonic companion. Johnny Weir reveals in a deep masculine voice his flamboyant persona is apparently an act to attract skater chicks, that Tara only treats guys like Stewie that way with her gay friends, and when Stewie protests, Johnny threatens him. The sexuality denial becomes even more complicated because the episode positions Stewie as Tara's gay best friend without him realizing that's his role in her life. She treats him exactly the way she'd treat Johnny, with casual intimacy and friendly affection, while Stewie interprets it as romantic interest. The tragic irony is that Stewie correctly identified that Tara's life mirrors his own best friends with a gay guy, but he misidentified which role he plays in that dynamic. He thought he was Tara falling for someone, when actually he's Johnny being friend-zoned. This moment fits perfectly into the show's long-running approach to Stewie's sexuality. Acknowledge it constantly through subtext and comparison, then have Stewie explicitly deny it whenever directly confronted. He can sing about preferring men, ask Brian on dates, fall in love with male celebrities, maintain a drag persona, and compare himself to women who are best friends with gay men. But the second someone suggests he might actually be gay, he immediately rejects the label. The ongoing confusion mentioned in the description is Stewie's inability to reconcile his behavior and attractions with accepting any explicit identity label. The episode never resolves this tension. After Johnny ruins Stewie's chances with Tara by sleeping with her, because Johnny's straight guy persona successfully seduces women while his gay persona makes them comfortable enough to get close, Stewie just moves on with his heartbreak. The denial of being gay stands as his official statement, even though literally everything else about the storyline suggests otherwise. It's Family Guy maintaining its standard operating procedure. Stewie can be as queer-coded as possible as long as he occasionally says, "I'm not gay," to provide plausible deniability. After Stewie's Tara Lipinski obsession spirals into a denial-fueled identity crisis, next the show casually drops a major update about Ida Davis, Quagmire's father, without missing a beat. Ida Davis's new surname gets casually dropped. Quagmire accidentally reveals his transgender father changed her last name from Quagmire to Davis after transitioning, delivering this information as a stammering correction during Meg's disastrous 18th birthday party, before immediately moving on to hit on her. Quagmire and Meg, from Season 10, opens with the Griffin family attending the Teen Choice Awards for Meg's 18th birthday, which devolves into chaos when a mass shooting breaks out, because apparently that's the kind of casual violence Family Guy throws into cold opens. They return home for Meg's surprise party, only to discover nobody showed up because Chris spent the $300 Peter gave him to pay classmates to attend on getting Peter to come instead. The party consists of just the family standing around awkwardly, while Mort Goldman throws a Jewish fight club next door with the rule that you stop when someone says, "ow." Just as everyone's about to give up and go to bed, Quagmire shows up at the door, claiming a little birdie told him it's Meg's birthday, the little birdie being Chris, who demands credit for the tip. Quagmire presents Meg with a scented candle as a gift, noting it was originally $30 because nothing says "I care," like announcing the pre-discount price. He then launches into his standard greeting. "Oh please, my father is Mr. Quagme. Oh no, okay, well he used to be Mr. Quagmire. Now he's just Ida Davis." This single stammering sentence is the only mention of Ida's name change in the entire episode. Quagmire catches himself mid-automatic response, realizes his father is no longer Mr. Quagmire, and corrects to Ida Davis, before immediately pivoting back to hitting on the newly legal Meg. The show treats it as a throwaway detail, something so mundane it barely registers as worth discussing. There's no explanation about when or why Ida chose Davis specifically, no conversation about the significance of taking a new surname as part of her transition, nothing. Just a quick correction and move on. The name change detail suggests Ida wanted to fully separate from her previous identity as Dan Quagmire, decorated war hero and Glenn's father. Taking a completely different last name, rather than keeping Quagmire or feminizing it somehow, represents a total break from her past life. Davis is notably generic and unremarkable, the kind of surname that doesn't draw attention or invite questions, which makes sense for someone navigating life as a transgender woman in a world that isn't always accepting. The rest of the episode focuses entirely on Quagmire pursuing a relationship with Meg after learning she's now legally an adult. He starts texting her constantly, takes her on dates, and eventually invites her to his sex cabin, which he actually calls the "stuff it in," a pun so terrible it deserves its own prison sentence. Peter initially tries playing it cool, per Lois's advice, that pushing back will only make Meg more determined, but eventually they realize Meg is actually planning to sleep with Quagmire and race to the cabin to stop it. The whole thing plays out like a creepy older man grooming a teenager, except the show frames it as a father protecting his daughter's virtue rather than addressing how inappropriate the entire situation is. Ida never appears in this episode and only gets mentioned in that one line about her name change. The show had already introduced her character in the controversial Quagmire's Dad episode from Season 8, where her transition was treated as both punchline and plot device. This episode acknowledges her existence just long enough to update viewers on her current name before using her as a transition, pun intended, into Quagmire's speech about Meg becoming an adult. The casual nature of the name reveal actually works in the episode's favor, treating Ida's choice as unremarkable rather than making it into a big, dramatic moment. For once, Family Guy doesn't turn every aspect of a trans character's existence into a joke or teaching moment. The name change just is, mentioned briefly, and then the show moves on to other business, specifically, Quagmire being a predator. Whether this counts as respectful representation or just the show not caring enough to make it into content is up for debate. The episode never explains what Davis means to Ida or why she chose it. There's no indication it was a family name, a favorite celebrity, or just something that sounded nice. It exists purely as information. Dan Quagmire transitioned and became Ida Davis. The first name change was covered in the original episode, but the surname change adds another layer to her transformation, suggesting she wanted to fully reinvent herself rather than just updating her first name and keeping everything else the same. This moment represents one of the few times Family Guy references Ida without centering her trans identity as the entire joke. She gets mentioned as context for who Quagmire's father used to be versus who she is now, and then the episode continues. For a show that usually can't resist making trans people into extended bits about bathroom confusion and surgical procedures, the restraint here is almost notable. Almost, because the bar for Family Guy's handling of transgender characters is so low it's practically underground. After the surname drop in Quagmire and Meg, Ida next appears in Brian's ex-girlfriend intervention, even though she's not his ex, leading to one of the show's most notorious trans jokes. Brian's ex-girlfriend intervention includes Ida. Stewie Griffin organizes a surprise intervention by gathering all of Brian's ex-girlfriends to figure out why his relationships keep failing, with Ida Davis awkwardly included in the lineup despite being Quagmire's father rather than Brian's actual ex, leading to Brian lashing out with transphobic insults when the criticism gets too real. Valentine's Day in Quahog, from Season 11, presents multiple Valentine's Day storylines happening simultaneously across Quahog. Brian's storyline begins with him complaining to Stewie about being alone on Valentine's Day, lamenting that he can't meet the right woman and maybe it's time to give up on love entirely. Stewie, playing armchair therapist, decides the solution is getting to the source of the problem by bringing in expert witnesses. He arranges a surprise gathering and leads Brian into a room filled with every woman Brian has ever dated, all sitting together drinking wine like a support group for survivors of terrible relationships. Brian's immediate reaction is shock and horror at seeing all his exes assembled in one place. Stewie introduces the concept like he's hosting a focus group. These women all dated Brian, things didn't work out, and now they're going to figure out why. The feedback comes immediately. The women describe Brian as self-absorbed, pretentious, and having a massive ego. One adds that he's insecure and a blowhard. Another mentions he has a tiny penis, which gets the whole group laughing. Then Ida speaks up. In a masculine voice, noticeably different from the feminine voice she uses in other episodes, she says, "I think Brian's a wonderful man. He's just having a difficult time coming to terms with his own sexuality." Stewie's response is, "Shut up, Ida. She's my favorite," which acknowledges that Ida doesn't really belong in this ex-girlfriend assembly, but Stewie invited her anyway. The problem is that Ida isn't Brian's ex-girlfriend. She's Quagmire's transgender father who Brian unknowingly slept with once, leading to 30 seconds of vomiting. Her inclusion suggests Stewie either couldn't find enough actual ex-girlfriends or thought it would be funny to invite the one woman whose experience with Brian was defined entirely by his transphobic reaction to her. Brian does not handle the criticism well. After the women continue listing his flaws, he snaps and starts firing insults at each of them. When he gets to Ida, his insult is, "You still have bits of penis left, and you can never get wet." This is one of the most explicitly transphobic lines in the entire series. Brian isn't criticizing Ida's personality, he's attacking her body and the results of her gender reassignment surgery. The "bits of penis left" comment suggests her surgery was incomplete or botched. The "can never get wet" remark attacks her ability to function sexually as a woman, implying she's not a real woman because her body doesn't respond the same way a cisgender woman's would. The women respond by attacking him physically, but the show frames this as comeuppance for insulting all of them, not specifically for his transphobic attack on Ida. What makes Ida's inclusion especially strange is that the intervention examines why Brian's relationships fail due to his personality defects. But Brian's relationship with Ida failed because he was horrified to discover she's transgender, not because she found him self-absorbed. She doesn't belong in this group analyzing Brian's character flaws because their encounter never got far enough for his personality to be the problem. The episode treats this as a comedic set piece, where Brian gets roasted before losing his temper. But including Ida transforms it into something uglier, where a trans woman gets invited just so Brian can eventually insult her surgical history. The show presents no consequences for Brian's comments, he doesn't apologize, nobody calls him out, and the episode moves on. The "bits of penis left" line became one of the more infamous examples of Family Guy's transphobic content. Unlike other controversial jokes that hide behind "it's just a character being ignorant," this has Brian supposedly educated and liberal directly attacking Ida's surgical results as an insult. It treats surgical transition as something to mock rather than a medical procedure trans people undergo to align their bodies with their identities. If you enjoyed our video today, subscribe to the channel for more.